the prolonged phenomenon termed Indianization, in which aspects of Indian culture were assimilated or selected by the Cambodian populace over a duration exceeding a millennium. The exact commencement of the process and its operational variations over time remain unknown. The comprehensive theories proposed by French and Dutch scholars often underappreciate the significance of local choice, while some authors may overstate the relevance of local factors. As noted by George Coates, scholars educated in Indian culture highlight India's civilizing mission, whereas those trained in the social sciences focus on the indigenous response. Historians must address both facets of the exchange. The process of cultural change is intricate. When and why did Indian cultural elements become favored over local ones? Which cultural elements experienced absorption, modification, or rejection? In the discourse on Indianization, we confront the classifications referred to by certain anthropologists as the Great and Little traditions. The former is associated with India, Sanskrit, royal courts, and Hinduism, while the latter pertains to Cambodia, Khmer culture, rural communities, and folk religion. In Cambodia, these classifications are not particularly beneficial. The great tradition of Cambodian village life cannot be understated. What is the role of monastic Buddhism and little tradition practices, such as ancestor worship and folklore, within the court context? The wisdom of the village consistently influenced the court, while princely values embedded in Hindu epics and Buddhist legends, including Jataka tales, permeated village life. Currently, Cambodia's urban and rural cultural traditions interact comparably. Nonetheless, the Indianization process rendered Cambodia ostensibly Indian. In the 19th century, Cambodian peasants donned distinctly Indian attire and, in numerous aspects, exhibited behaviors more akin to Indians than to their nearest neighbors, the Vietnamese. Cambodians utilized spoons and fingers for eating, transported goods on their heads, donned turbans instead of straw hats, and wore skirts rather than trousers. Musical instruments, jewelry, the alphabet and manuscripts were similarly characterized by Indian aesthetics. Indians may have introduced cattle raising in Cambodia early. Its prevalence in the remainder of mainland Southeast Asia remains largely unknown. Trade between prehistoric India and Cambodia likely commenced before the Sanskritization of India. Indeed, as Paul Muss has posited, Cambodia, southern India, and present-day Bengal likely shared the cultural framework of monsoon Asia, highlighting the significance of ancestral and tutelary deities in the agricultural cycle. These deities were frequently represented in stones that either naturally resembled phalluses or were sculpted to mimic them for ritualistic purposes. It was believed that offerings to the stones guaranteed soil fertility. Cults of this nature were not confined to Asia. However, Muss's observation that an Indian traveller in Cambodia would recognize them as Siva, or his consort cults, is insightful. A Cambodian visiting India, or learning about it, would observe certain cults that venerate the Indian deity. In the initial 5 centuries of the current era, India imparted to Cambodia a writing system, a pantheon, poetic meters, the Sanskrit language, a lexicon of social hierarchies, distinct from a caste system, Buddhism, the concept of universal kingship, and novel perspectives on politics, sociology, architecture, iconography, astronomy, and aesthetics. The construction of Angkor would not have transpired without India. Nevertheless, Angkor was never an Indian city, just as medieval Paris was not a Roman city. Indian influence in Cambodia was not imposed through colonization or coercion. Indian forces did not invade Cambodia. Any elevated status enjoyed by individual Indians was partially achieved by persuading the local populace of its legitimacy. Initially, the local populace assimilated the Indians as either explorers or merchants. news from India frequently arrived through Cambodian traders who had traveled to the subcontinent. Indianization did not engender the identity crisis among Cambodians that Chinese colonization and cultural imperialism instigated among the Vietnamese. Cambodia never opposed India, which, in any event, was not a cohesive state. Furthermore, in contrast to Vietnam's relationship with Han China, Cambodia did not seek ideas, validation, or counsel from India after the 14th century. Indianization provided the elite class in Cambodia with a structure and a lexicon, yet it was not exclusively political. Furthermore, the hierarchical structures that defined the language and conduct of the Cambodian elite, while influenced by Indian paradigms, did not originate from a discernible caste system impacting Cambodian society. At the village level, caste considerations did not establish themselves. What appeared to be a caste system at the medieval Cambodian court was likely merely a series of ritual practices demonstrating reverence for Indian traditions. Another consequence of Indianization in Cambodia is that Cambodian nationalism, in contrast to its Vietnamese equivalent, has not typically portrayed itself as the result of a struggle against foreign invaders and influences. Until recently, Cambodians regarded national identity as the result of the existing social structures within the country. The Indianization and aspects of life attributed to India were simply parts of the whole. Their origin from India, akin to our polysyllabic terms derived from Greece and Rome, was not deemed a cause for concern. Like numerous Southeast Asian nations, Cambodia possesses a legend that stems from the union of a foreigner and a dragon princess, or Nagi, whose progenitor was the monarch of a waterlogged realm. In one rendition of the myth, a Brahmin named Kaun Dinya, equipped with a mystical bow, emerged one day along the coast of Cambodia. The dragon princess rode out to confront him. Kaun Dinya discharged an arrow into her vessel, instilling fear in the princess and compelling her to wed him. Before the marriage, Kaun Dinya provided her with garments, and in return her father, the Dragon King, augmented his son-in-law's holdings by depleting the water that enveloped the land. Subsequently, he established a capital and renamed the territory Kambuja. This myth originates from India, as does the name Kambuja, and it may depict an obscure confrontation that transpired during the Aryanization of southern India, rather than an event in Southeast Asia. Although it may be ineffectual as a fact, it presents an intriguing foundation for the study of Cambodian history. In the myth, Cambodians perceive themselves as the progeny of a union between culture and nature. Kaun Dinya's endorsement by his father-in-law, who depletes the kingdom on his behalf, is essential to his triumph. This concept would have been recognizable to Cambodians, as until recently, a potential groom frequently needed to obtain his in-laws' consent by cohabiting with them before marriage. In the myth, the indigenous populace, i.e. the dragons, reveres the Brahmin and in his tribute bestows an Indian appellation upon the kingdom. First documented in a Cambodian inscription from the 9th century CE. Subsequently, numerous Cambodian monarchs would claim descent from this legendary couple, symbolizing, among other aspects, a union between the sun and the moon. To be a legitimate king, one apparently needed to possess Cambodian and Indian heritage. Chinese officials documented the Kaun Dinya myth. The written records of Cambodian history were predominantly Chinese during the initial centuries of the Christian era. These are augmented by archaeological discoveries, particularly from the remnants of an ancient trading city adjacent to the contemporary Vietnamese village of Okio in the Mekong Delta, excavated during World War II under the supervision of Louis Malloret. Roman coins discovered at the site and at Angkor originate from the 2nd and 3rd centuries, while certain Indian artifacts, such as seals and jewelry, can also be dated to this period. Malloret posited that the port diminished in significance during the 4th century. Nevertheless, no extant records exist, and the identities of its inhabitants are unknown. Based on its geographical position and artifacts, Malaret deduced the pilgrims and traders traversing between India and China during the early Christian era utilized the port. The city's dimensions reflect its substantial importance in this commerce, and its advantageous position rendered it an optimal location for vessels traversing the coastline and accessing the South China Sea. The city likely served as a storage facility for goods in transit between India and China, and functioned as a distribution point for products sourced from the forested regions of Cambodia and Vietnam. Before the 20th century, Cambodia's export trade predominantly comprised forest products and precious metals. These comprised gold, elephants, ivory, rhinoceros horn, kingfisher feathers, exotic spices like cardamom, and forest products, including lacquer, hides, and fragrant wood. During the colonial era, plantation exports such as rubber and pepper were established. Rice exports, which constituted the majority of Cambodia's foreign trade in the 20th century, were largely inconsequential in earlier times, when most of the population produced sufficient food for sustenance. The salient observation regarding these high-value, low-bulk commodities is that they were sourced or harvested by forest dwellers, rather than urban residents. Many likely traversed significant distances before arriving at Ok-Eo, as did the merchants of goods or currency utilized for transactions. Until recently, numerous scholars posited that Ok-Eo served as the port for a significant kingdom referred to by Chinese sources as Funan, which George Codies located near the minor hillock known as Ba Phnom in southeastern Cambodia, east of the Mekong, based on linguistic evidence rather than archaeological data. Codies asserts that the term Funan originates from the ancient Khmer word for mountain, Bianam, and he identified Ba Phnom as the ritual center of the kingdom. A cult dedicated to Siva as a mountain deity existed in Cambodia as early as the 5th century CE, and may have been practiced in Ba Phnom. An Indian traveler to China noted that the local custom involves the veneration of the celestial deity Mahesvara Siva, who frequently descends upon Matmotam, ensuring a perpetually temperate climate and the vitality of flora. Paul Wheatley posits that the cult originated in southern India and that the mountain in question was not Ba Phnom, but another hill in Vietnam. The evidence supporting the notion that either mountain served as a cult site is more compelling than the evidence indicating that Funan was a significant, unified kingdom, or that its political center was linked to either hill. The significance of the location to the Chinese stemmed from the principality known as Funan, which intermittently paid tribute to the Chinese emperor from 253 to 519. Stone inscriptions from a century later in Sanskrit and Khmer are accessible for examination. They do not substantiate the existence of a significant kingdom. Minor chiefdoms in Cambodia periodically united and designated themselves as a kingdom to dispatch tribute to China, thereby fostering trade or to solicit Chinese assistance against neighboring adversaries. Funan was considered a significant kingdom due to the Chinese aspiration for its future prominence. French scholars sought a precursor to the more centralized kingdom of Angkor, which emerged in northwestern Cambodia during the 9th century. Although valuable, Chinese sources from this period pose distinct challenges for historians, as numerous accounts uncritically reiterate information from earlier compilations as if it remains accurate. Nevertheless, Chinese depictions are frequently as vivid as this description of Funan. The royal residence features a double terrace. Palisades replace walls in fortified locations. A coastal plant envelops the houses with its foliage. The leaves measure 6 to 7 feet in length and resemble a fish. The king is mounted on an elephant. His subjects are unattractive and of African descent. Their hair is curly and devoid of clothing and footwear. They cultivate the soil for sustenance. They plant annually and harvest for 3 years. These individuals possess historical records. They even maintain archives for their writings. Evidence indicates that the implementation of systematic irrigation, potentially as late as 500 BC, unified small principalities cultivating dry rice and roots, alongside individuals who venerated Siva in hunting and gathering societies located inland from during the Funan period. Drainage likely occurred earlier. The Kaundinya myth attributes drainage to the advantageous actions of a dragon king. However, the most significant passage concerning this innovation and Indianization is Chinese, initially appearing as a distorted rendition of the original myth. A Brahmin named Kaundinya subsequently governed the kingdom. A spirit summoned him to rule Funan, compelling him to journey there. The inhabitants of Funan emerged to greet him and declared him king. He modified the institutions to adhere to Indian models. He desired his subjects to cease excavating wells and to construct reservoirs instead. Several dozen families could subsequently consolidate and utilize one of these collectively. Inscriptions from the 7th and 8th centuries mention rice fields near religious establishments indicative of irrigated rice cultivation, while aerial imagery of the Mekong Delta reveals silted canals that likely served for drainage and transportation. Although irrigation was commonly employed before the 9th century, it was not implemented on a particularly extensive scale. Aside from the 7th century aggregation of Isanapura, currently referred to as Sambor Prey Kuk, near Kompong Tom, the village constituted the predominant unit of pre-Angkorian Cambodia. Isanapura is likely comprised of villages clustered around a shared ritual center, the stone structures of which have endured. Despite the advent of wet rice technology, possibly in the 4th or 5th century, the extent of irrigated land managed by supra-village organizations remained limited. Furthermore, it appears probable that most villagers in the hinterland persisted in cultivating dry rice and root crops, augmenting their diet through hunting and gathering, even after irrigation and wet rice agriculture became established in relatively Hinduized communities. Wet rice cultivation necessitates human labor rather than land itself. Considering this fact, along with the sparse population density across the region, excluding Java, Bali, and the Red River Delta in Vietnam, it is evident why, throughout Southeast Asian history, dominion and authority were frequently conceptualized and sought in terms of governing people rather than territory. Population pressure compelled Cambodian monarchs, such as Jayavarman II, to annex new territories suitable for rice cultivation to accommodate the populace. During the 12th century under Jayavarman VII, certain epochs of Cambodian history emphasized the significance of extensive territorial dominion as a crucial aspect of royal prestige. However, dominion over territory, often consisting of mere forest, was seldom as significant as the control of individuals. The concept of alienable land ownership, separate from land use, has not yet emerged in pre-Angkorian Cambodia. Land left uncultivated for 3 years reverted to state ownership. The king possessed all the kingdom's land to compensate individuals for its utilization. Numerous Cambodian language inscriptions from the Angkorian period addressed intricate conflicts regarding access to land and labor resources. Inscriptions, and consequently architectural remnants from the initial 8 centuries of the Christian era, do not indicate that Cambodia was inhabited by extensive, unified kingdoms. Aside from Angkor Bore, there is limited evidence of urban development. Inscriptions indicate that elite members intermarried, potentially fostering continuity. Simultaneously, it appears probable that the region presently known as Cambodia, akin to much of early Southeast Asia, comprised a series of small states, each possessing a court and an elite, with these factions supported by entourages or strengths of individuals engaged in agriculture, who could also be summoned for military service. It is likely that these chiefdoms engaged in trade with one another and conducted raids, especially to acquire enslaved individuals. It appears probable that each king, when untroubled or when causing disruption to others, regarded himself as a universal sovereign, drawing from Indian doctrines while simultaneously acting as a local chieftain, executing discernible Cambodian duties. Leadership was predominantly assessed by prowess, encompassing success in warfare, the capacity to garner a substantial following, and proficiency in conducting religious rituals and offering protection. J.D.M. Derrett has emphasized that security and precipitation are vital to agrarian communities, offering defense against adversaries, competing lords, and environmental elements. In acknowledgement of this necessity, rulers during the Funan period and throughout Cambodian history frequently incorporated the suffix Burman, originally meaning armor, thus protection, in their reign titles. Overlords believed they required supernatural protection, which most sought through devotion to Siva. They received assistance from Indian Brahmins, known as Pasuputa, who were prominent in India and other parts of Southeast Asia during the 5th and 6th centuries. These itinerant ascetics asserted that individual worship of Siva yielded greater rewards than strict adherence to Brahmanical rites, the doctrine of fate or karma. Technically, an overlord's allegiance did not necessitate the mediation of the pastor, and some presumably managed without it. These self-proclaimed Hindus were regarded as superior individuals and considered themselves embodiments of Siva, the deity who continuously descended upon a sacred mountain. The conveyance of Siva's power through the overlord and his ceremonial practices to the populace and the land was a significant source of unity in Cambodian society. It has also served as a source of continuity. Human sacrifices to a consort of Siva occurred at Bafnom as recently as 1877, signifying the commencement of the agricultural year. Local officials organized these rituals which, like those detailed in 5th century Chinese texts, sought to impart fertility to the area. During the Funan period, Buddhism thrived in Cambodia, and the Buddhist notion of merit, which continues to permeate Cambodian societal thought, resembles the previously mentioned concepts of prowess and salvation. Both ideologies perceived power and capability as rewards for virtuous conduct in prior existences, particularly for those lacking such attributes. The loss, reduction, or absence of power is exposed to individuals whose prior existence had been defective. Consequently, an individual's societal status is predetermined by the historical actions of others, while one's present conduct influences their standing upon reincarnation. To enhance personal standing, one might accrue merit through virtuous actions, such as funding a temple, exhibiting generosity towards monks, donating a gilded deity, or sponsoring religious festivals. Individuals believed that engaging in such actions would lead to their redemption. The grand temples at Angkor were perceived as redemptive acts, representing agreements made by kings with their direct ancestors, and by extension, with the deities. No one could ascertain the success of the bargains. Yet the notion of foregoing them, particularly given that the afterlife entailed a return to Earth, was uncommon. The concepts of patron, client, and entourage gained significance in the later periods of Cambodian history. They serve as valuable insights into 19th century Cambodian society and, to a degree, contemporary Cambodian political dynamics. However, it would be perilous to presume that identical structures were operational in Cambodia during the 6th and 7th centuries. We rarely understand how overlords ascended to power or how they garnered followers. We are uncertain about the reasons that caused followers to remain in their service or the specific nature of the services provided. Current knowledge regarding pre-Angkorian society in Cambodia indicates a hierarchical structure of leaders and followers residing in regions with central and peripheral zones, akin to the Indian conceptualization of mandalas. Nonetheless, the political application of the term was not widespread in Cambodia during that period. Cambodia exhibited decentralization through many centers, where various societal segments operated independently or interacted sporadically. However, the situation was not entirely straightforward. Localized religious cults, such as those studied by Eveline Poré Maspero and others in Cambodia during the 1940s and 1950s, predominantly emphasized communal welfare over individual interests, as irrigated rice cultivation necessitates collective labor. Rural existence necessitates collaborations. The human sacrifices at Phnom exemplified this communal orientation. Additional elements encompass the intricate rituals that continue to herald the agricultural year, such as the sacred furrow and the towers of sand. The royal cults that, in essence, engage with the deceased for the kingdom's prosperity, and the boat races conducted in inundated rivers after planting. Despite initially seeming antagonistic towards one another, the great and little traditions once more, these cults are, in fact, complementary. Due to the absence of genealogical records in Cambodia, except among the elite, the Nakta, or ancestral figures, lacked surnames. Consequently, they became the emblematic forebears of individuals in a specific locale, or by perishing in a location, they came to preside over its land. Nakta in inhabited areas could be communicated with and domesticated. Those residing in forests or desolate locations were perceived as more potent and malevolent. As the location became populated, ancestral traditions accumulated over time, albeit not to the same degree as in China or Vietnam. The pre-Angkorian record largely lacks references to Nakta. However, by analyzing contemporary data, we can conclude that interactions between Hindu and indigenous beliefs were more characterized by synthesis than by conflict. Early Chinese visitors observed a propensity for syncretism. Early Chinese visitors observed a venerated bodhisattva or Buddha to be in the account detailing Siva's perpetual descent onto Mount Motan. At times, two Indian deities were amalgamated, exemplified by Siva's fusion with Vishnu to create Harihara, a composite god highly esteemed by Angkorian monarchs. By amalgamating the characteristics of Siva, the creator and destroyer of worlds, with those of Vishnu, the protector, Harihara, offered individuals various concepts and illustrated how an exemplary ruler should adeptly equilibrate conflicting forces. The amalgamation of various religions resulted in local spirits adopting the names of Indian deities, akin to the renaming of localized Greek and Roman gods during the nascent stages of Christianity. Hindu temples were frequently constructed near locations preferred for pre-Indian festivities. Neolithic remnants exist beneath the palace at Angkor. During such times, the emphasis was on the continuity of habitation and the perpetuation of sacredness, concepts deeply embedded in Cambodian culture. When centralization and prosperity prevailed, ancestors were deified as Indian gods. However, they reverted to their ancestral status as the justification for Hinduism, and its priestly advocates waned or vanished. Consequently, at Angkor and in charm sites in Vietnam examined in the 1930s by Paul Moose, Indian iconography and temples were venerated in relatively recent times, not as derivatives from India, but as enigmatic creations of the Nakta. This is partly due to the disappearance or indecipherability of the literature produced by the Cham and Cambodian elites, which served to elucidate and legitimize the imagery and temples. In contrast, the vernacular employed by village inhabitants in their religious practices largely remained consistent from the pre-Indian period through colonial times. According to Paul Moose, the most persistent cult was that of the lingam or stone phallus. This prevalent motif and associated cults illustrate connections between ancestor spirits, the earth from which they and the lingam emerged, and the fertility of adjacent soil for agricultural purposes. Due to the territorial nature of the cult, a lingam could be ceremoniously relocated but possessed efficacy in only one location at a time, and the belief that the lingam served as a community patron. It was meticulously overseen by local authorities and the king during the Angkorian period. Chinese sources indicate that as early as the 5th century, a cult venerating a mountain deity at Lingaparvata in southern Laos, presently known as Wat Phu, engaged in human sacrifices. The location was significant due to its colossal natural lingam, approximately 18 meters, 59 feet, tall. 27 Linga Parvata, similar to Bar Phnom, was revered as an ancestral site by numerous Angkorian monarchs. During the Funan period, which extended until the 6th century, the political epicenter of Cambodia was located to the south and east of contemporary Phnom Penh. During this period, trade between India and China was vigorous, with Buddhist religious artifacts being a primary component. Local religious customs prioritized veneration of Siva, Vishnu, Buddha, and lesser local Hindu deities, especially female figures referred to as Kapuon. Political organization was focused on villages and clusters of villages rather than a centralized kingdom. Irrigated rice cultivation facilitated surpluses and some social stratification, as posited by Michael Vickery, albeit to a lesser extent than in subsequent developments. From a historian's perspective, the primary emphasis is that our knowledge of this period derives from Chinese sources, which document local customs, centralization, and trade commodities. From the 7th century onward, no Cambodian voices are present in stone inscriptions. Following the decline of Funan, our sources become more abundant yet more challenging to utilize. The earliest dated Khmer language inscription from Cambodia was engraved in 611, followed by the first Sanskrit inscription 2 years later. Approximately 200 datable inscriptions in both languages from the 7th century provide insight into the structure of Cambodian society. The inscriptions indicate an informal stratification of Cambodian society between individuals proficient in Sanskrit and those solely conversant in Khmer. For centuries, inscriptions purportedly directed towards the deities were composed in Sanskrit. Conversely, Khmer was the primary language of Cambodian individuals, those safeguarded by deities and descended, unlike deities, from their forebears and the regionally specific Naktar. Sanskrit inscriptions composed in verse extol the deeds of monarchs and the aristocracy, including the construction of Hindu temples, patronage of Buddhist monasteries, military conquests, and providing gifts to monks and Brahmins. Certain speakers recount or distort their lineage, ostensibly aiming to exploit or fabricate ancestral prestige. Others laud Brahmins at the expense of other social groups. And all convey sincere appreciation toward those in power who ultimately authorized the construction of temples and the obliteration of stone inscriptions. According to Indianists, much of the verse is meticulously refined, eloquently phrased, and expertly crafted, favorably comparable to contemporary Sanskrit poetry from India. Conversely, Khmer inscriptions are exclusively in prose. They document the establishment of temples and the specifics of temple governance, including the identities and quantities of individuals associated with a particular foundation. They provide inventories of temple treasures and specify the dimensions of rice fields, orchards, and ponds, trapiang, within a temple's jurisdiction. Numerous individuals delineated the responsibilities of enslaved individuals and established the tax obligations, payable through labor or goods, imposed to sustain the temple priests. Numerous individuals consistently conclude with a curse, in Khmer, menacing those who neglect, steal from, or disturb the temple with retribution spanning multiple generations. The distinction between Sanskrit and Khmer delineates the so-called great and little traditions with excessive precision. On one hand, wealth, poetry, complexity, wordplay, clergy, and access to the divine exist, namely, a language that provides protection. Conversely, poverty, prose, unembellished catalogues, enslaved individuals, and the realm of common people exist, namely, a discourse concerning what is afforded protection. Both collections of inscriptions employed an identical alphabet derived from India and were typically carved by the same artisans. Both poets and priests could read them if they so desired. Were they designed for reading? Generally, they were sufficiently accessible, inscribed on temple doorposts or independent steles, The texts were likely preserved on ephemeral materials in separate archives. Inscribing on stone the divine medium fulfilled a specific function, resulting in their carving. Stone was not utilized in secular structures. Palaces and common residences were constructed from wood, bamboo, and other ephemeral materials. The elites believed that the deities favored Sanskrit, whereas stone was linked to permanence and the deceased. In carving the stones, Cambodians communally addressed their ancestors. The inscriptions, when in Sanskrit, conveyed the language of the divine. Individuals believed that engraving a curse or oath of allegiance on stone possessed greater potency. Furthermore, we must not disregard the legal dimension of the inscriptions. Recording land grants on stone was believed to acknowledge and safeguard beneficiaries. Likewise, curses in Khmer could function as deterrents against theft and protect the sites from vandalism. The distinction between Sanskrit and Khmer delineated rice cultivators from non-cultivators. It was the aspiration of all to be liberated from the mire, yet only a few achieved this. During the Angkorian era, the majority were categorized into various varna or caste groupings, constituting approximately 1/10 of the entire society. These comprised clerks, artisans, concubines, artists, high-ranking officials, priests, royal attendants, relatives, and soldiers. Due to their infrequent status as enslaved individuals and the limited number who were significant enough to support a temple, these individuals are seldom mentioned in Cambodian inscriptions. This omission signifies, among other aspects, that we remain unaware of the identities of those who conceived and sculpted Angkor's magnificent statuary and temples. By the 7th century, Isanapura was the most extensive stone-building complex in Southeast Asia, constructed a century before comparable edifices in Java. Nonetheless, the existence of these free individuals positioned between the apex of society, represented by the king's palace and his sacrificial mountain, and the adjacent rice fields, should not prompt us to categorize them as bourgeoisie or even middle class, as such designations are inapplicable, and our knowledge regarding these individuals is insufficient. The implications of Western-centric social terminology complicate our understanding of other Cambodian social groups. The term king, or Raja, likely held less significance in Funan than in medieval Europe. The term Kanyom, which translates to slave, appears to have a more ambiguous connotation for the Khmer than the English equivalent. Judith Jacob has demonstrated that Kanyom constituted merely one of approximately 14 categories of enslaved individuals in pre-Angkorian Cambodia. They possessed various social strata, diverse origins, and responsibilities. The laborers in the fields resembled enslaved black individuals in the antebellum American South. Some individuals may have perceived themselves as possessing a quasi-clerical status, particularly those affiliated with temples. Nevertheless, although these groups of individuals appeared to be commodified, lacking the autonomy to flee, they were not classified as servants. Many were likely indentured servants repaying debts incurred by their parents. Were they classified as serfs? The inquiry should alert us to the potential confusion arising from interchangeable terminology, and communist assertions from the 1970s that early Cambodia was feudal are erroneous, despite the evident exploitative and sharply divided nature of the society between the affluent and the impoverished. The evidence linking enslaved individuals to specific locations is insufficient, although some have been associated with particular places for multiple generations. This indicates the presence of hereditary servitude, an obligation, and a tie to a particular locale rather than to a specific lord. Certain villagers had the liberty to cultivate their own rice, but lacked the freedom to relocate. Others seemed to be possessed by temples, while some remained under the ownership of elite individuals. Practices and theories have fluctuated over time and across locations. Thus, Generalizations regarding Cambodian society during this period are challenging to formulate. Inscriptions indicate that slaves of diverse types likely constituted most of the Cambodian population at any given time. Free peasants could utilize their time and energy for public works, obligations to an overlord, service to a temple, or participation in wars. A significant number of them were either prisoners of war or their progeny. The enslaved individuals are merely referenced as names in Cambodian history. This is a mixture of Sanskrit and Khmer vocabulary. The inscriptions vary from respectful references, where names are denoted with equivalents of Mr. or Ms., to derogatory terms, labeling enslaved individuals as dog, imperfect, red in the face, and bad-smelling. Typically, enslaved persons with identifiable Sanskrit names, such as Love's Justice, Slaves of Siva, or Dharma, generally occupied a marginally elevated status compared to their counterparts, with many potentially engaging in professions as musicians and dancers. In contemporary Cambodia, numerous names remain familiar. For example, girls frequently adopt floral names. Pre-Angkorian enslaved people differed from antebellum enslaved Americans, in that their villages, sustenance, and beliefs resembled those of liberated rice farmers or their proprietors. If the kingdom had been dismantled, its inhabitants typically originated from comparable cultures. The divide between urban and rural areas was not yet significant or extensive. Many Khnyom, as temple attendants, engaged in annual rituals, including the washing, dressing, and procession of gilded images and the ceremonial opening of a Buddha image's eyes. They gathered around royal processions and created adornments for palanquins as they traversed. The Khnyom resided in the vicinity of magnificence. They articulated grandeur to one another in terms of merit and safeguarding. Like others in society, they perceived themselves as orchestrating their salvation. What could be more fitting than to serve the priests who attended to the temple deities? We can arrive at these provisional conclusions by examining contemporary Cambodian life or analyzing bas-reliefs, statues, artifacts, and inscriptions. However, as is often the case in Cambodian history, we document the peasants' words without direct access to their voices. What would they have articulated? It is challenging to conceive without posing a subsequent inquiry. To whom would they be conversing? Within their community, Cambodian peasants exhibit frankness and egalitarianism. However, they are cautious in the presence of outsiders. The peasants' ostensible acquiescence to their superiors has prompted certain scholars to advocate for intrinsic harmony within traditional Cambodian society. Nonetheless, Cambodian history is replete with insurrections and civil conflicts, and occurrences since 1970 should render us cautious of authors who assert an inherent passivity among Cambodian agrarians. The lack of peasant voices renders it equally challenging to advocate for ongoing turmoil, as it is for tranquility. Frequently, there were ample reasons for both. However, pre-Angkorian Cambodia, possibly Angkor itself, was not a cohesive despotic state. Rather, it constituted a conglomeration and succession of principalities, employing a tyrannical lexicon of governance and domination. The rulers of these principalities perceived themselves as absolute, leading some women to view one another as rivals and assert their independence. During the 8th century, when Chinese sources were uncommunicative due to the absence of tribute from Cambodia, the region achieved greater political coherence, a process adeptly elucidated through Khmer language inscriptions by Michael Vickery. Integration resulted in an increased population in the area, enhanced wet rice cultivation techniques, modifications in local governmental operations, and occurrences that appeared arbitrary, such as military triumphs or extended intervals of tranquility. As Cambodia's center of gravity progressively migrated northward, the region of Aninditapura, near contemporary Angkor, increased in significance relative to the principalities along the upper Mekong, including Sambor and other locations. Inscriptions were prevalent throughout Cambodia before the Angkorian period. The inscriptions indicate that the most densely populated regions were situated along the Mekong and lower Tonle Sap rivers, particularly to the south of present-day Phnom Penh. Settlements were also present along the upper Mekong near Kratie today. Until recently, academics aimed to unify this collection of minor kingdoms under the designation Chenla, a term the Chinese assigned to one of them and retained in 19th century Vietnamese as a reference to Cambodia. The Chinese differentiated between two Chenlas, one linked to the Mekong Delta, referred to as Water Chenla, and the other termed Land Chenla, seemingly situated in the upper Mekong region, possibly near contemporary Wat Pah U in southern Laos. The Chinese were inclined to amplify the significance of the so-called barbarian states from which they received tribute. During the 1800s and 1900s, European scholars, potentially oblivious to the multitude of kingdoms in medieval Europe and pre-colonial Africa, perceived Chenla as a centralized successor state to Funan. This delineated a distinct progression from the initial of these mighty kingdoms to the one situated at Angkor. Inscriptions provide evidence of numerous small realms and principalities in the Khmer region. Among them were those referred to by the Chinese as Funan and Chenla, which, for reasons yet to be determined, may have been the most significant. Occasionally, certain princes succeeded in assuming control over a relatively extensive aggregation of territories. However, this circumstance appeared to be merely transient. By the 7th and 8th centuries, it is evident that coastal trading states in Cambodia, such as Funan and similar entities in Southeast Asia, had either diminished or transformed into inland polities collectively referred to as Chenla in the Cambodian context. The prosperity of these emerging kingdoms stemmed chiefly from extensive wet rice agriculture and labor mobilization, rather than from subsistence farming and commerce. Indian ideologies, evident in architecture, sculpture, and inscriptions, have significantly influenced and shaped these societies, likely due to their hierarchical nature, which facilitated the legitimization of resource extraction, often through coercion. Over time, rituals may have become linked to wealth, which may have been associated with supernatural abilities in state formation, as noted by Vickery and Jonathan Friedman, among others. The process cannot be reconstructed from the existing documents. Significant in Cambodian history is the reversal of geographical and economic shifts from the 7th and 8th centuries during the 14th and 15th centuries. The initial changes correlate with the emergence of Angkor in the 9th and 10th centuries, while the subsequent transformations are linked to the development of a less monumental, less ambitious, and more outward-looking state centered around present-day Phnom Penh. Scholars generally define the Angkorian period of Cambodian history from 802 to 1431. These years represent neither an initiation nor a termination. The northwestern region of Cambodia, known as Angkor, from the Sanskrit term Nagara, meaning city, emerged in the 9th century and inhabited by Khmer-speaking peoples for several centuries. Moreover, despite considerable abandonment in the 15th century, the city remained inhabited and was briefly reinstated as a royal city in the 1570s. Notably, the Khmer never abandoned one of its main temples, Angkor Wat, i.e., the city temple. It contains Buddhist statuaries from the 15th to the 19th century, and displays wall inscriptions dating as far back as 1747. In the 1850s, when French missionaries and explorers discovered the Angkor complex, Angkor Wat contained a flourishing Buddhist monastery, sustained by several hundred hereditary enslaved individuals. The years 802 and 1431 are notable as they mark Cambodia's period of prominence. Over 6 centuries, Cambodia, known in its inscriptions as Kambuja Desa, became the dominant power in Southeast Asia, drawing visitors and tribute from areas as far as present-day Burma, Malaysia, and the eventual Thai kingdoms to the west. Concurrently, these periods of systematic domination were infrequent and very short-lived. Moreover, our comprehension of the socio-economic conditions throughout this era is inadequate to classify all Cambodian monarchs as despots. Certain individuals attained negligible or no achievements, while others generated many inscriptions, temples, monuments, and public edifices. Some monarchs presided over a centralized, multi-layered administration, whereas others commanded only a few hundred followers. A notable observation from the sequential analysis of the kings is that L.P. Briggs, George Coates, and Claude Jacques have effectively directed numerous individuals. From a comprehensive viewpoint, the Angkorian period can be readily summarized through written documentation. Yet achieving a complete understanding proves difficult. Analyzing artistic forms, media, and motifs, including the expertise of Cambodian poets in Sanskrit, it is possible to address growth, development, and decline. Yet the rationale behind the classification of certain periods as progressive and others as decadent remains ambiguous. From a limited viewpoint, it is facile to generalize about the continuity between that age and modern times. Yet we are hindered by the insufficiency of our sources. Sources pose considerable difficulties. The Sanskrit and Khmer inscriptions discussed in Chapter 2 exhibit biases that skew the portrayal of Cambodian society during the Angkor period. The Sanskrit hymns extol the grandeur of rulers, while the Khmer inscriptions depict the meticulous resolution of legal disputes and the recording of enslaved individuals. In specific cases, inscriptions may validate official positions, especially when detailing temple assets and staff. They provide insight into material culture. Reconstructing U.S. history from obituary notices, wills, deeds, and 4th of July speeches poses a significant problem. We meticulously date these categories of papers. Consequently, with specific exceptions, the Cambodians have reinstated the chronological framework of Angkor, particularly about the monarchs who ruled subsequently, which had been overlooked. The endeavor of chronological reconstruction proved persistently arduous, occupying a considerable segment of the career of possibly the preeminent scholar associated with early Southeast Asian history, the French intellectual George Coates, 1886 to 1968. Coates abstained from speculating on matters not covered by inscriptions, so imposing many obligations on his successors about the corpus of Cambodian inscriptions he assembled. The antiquated inscriptions exhibit a significant connection to time. Some of the elements of lasting structures have vanished and anchored them within the terrain. Nevertheless, with limited exceptions, the inscriptions fail to offer insights into the quotidian existence of Cambodia's rural inhabitants or detailed narratives of the political dynamics at Angkor and across the empire. They usually signify remarkable events, agreements established between people and deities, viewed from a lofty standpoint in poetry, or a pragmatic viewpoint in prose. The past conveyed to us resembles the intermittent lighting and extinguishing of countless torches throughout the landscape of mainland Southeast Asia. Each light illuminates the vicinity, disclosing particular historical details. Temple X was consecrated to an Indian deity on a designated date. It comprised multiple enslaved individuals, classified by name and gender, with children differentiated by their mobility. The temple grounds extended east to a creek, south to a small hill, and west and north to several landmarks, after which the light faded. Our comprehension of the temple's contextual importance during its period is constrained, encompassing the official standing of its benefactors and the length of its use, whether spanning months or decades. In specific inscriptions, descendants return to the place to maintain it in honor of their ancestors. Other temples seem to have existed just for the length of individual benefactors. Supplementary resources for studying Cambodian history encompass the temples, the statues and bas-reliefs they contain, and objects from the Angkorian era that have been unearthed throughout Cambodia. These offer substantial insights into the hierarchy and priorities of the Cambodian elite religion, the prevalence of particular Indian myths, and their reflection on elite concerns. They also provide insights into hemlines, hairstyles, and jewelry trends, which have been employed to create a chronology of artistic styles. The bas-reliefs offer insights into armament, armor, and military strategies. Those from the 13th century temple mountain, the Bayon, are a rich resource for comprehending ordinary Cambodian life. Alongside deeds, obituary notices, and orations, we can employ tableaux representing the residents of Angkor, mostly veiled as legendary figures, and bas-reliefs reflecting their quotidian occupations. Our sources lack papers that provide a holistic view of society and explore details like taxation, property ownership, personal histories, and cultural ideas. What occurred in the year 802? The Stok Kak Tom inscription, inscribed around 1050 in contemporary southeastern Thailand, has been an important resource for Cambodian chronology and religious history. Nonetheless, some assertions within it have recently faced scrutiny from diverse researchers. The inscription reveals that in 802, the ruler Jayavarman II ascended the Kulen Hills, located north of the future Angkor complex, and participated in a ritual that granted him the title of Universal Monarch. The ceremonies also paid homage to a cult of notable importance to the inscription. The Devaraja, a Sanskrit term meaning king of the gods, which distinctly links the monarch to Siva. Several years earlier, the ceremony was purportedly preceded by an auspicious magic rite performed by Jayavarman at the cult site of Ba Phnom in the southeast. 5. Jayavarman II and his son Jayavarman III did not produce any inscriptions, leading experts to suggest that the importance ascribed to these rulers as the founders of Angkor may be exaggerated. The Stok Kak Tom inscription principally relates to the sacerdotal lineage that oversaw the Devaraja festivities for over 2 centuries. The biographical information conveyed by the inscription is exceedingly advantageous. Jayavarman II apparently resided in 5 regions of Cambodia at different career stages. He appears to have migrated from the southeastern region near Ba Phnom to the upper Mekong Basin, adjacent to Sambor, before progressing westward to reside in Anindi Tapura, located to the north and east of the Tonle Sap, where he presumably governed a city and facilitated the construction of several small brick temples. What activities was Jayavarman involved in at these sites? Despite the extensive material available about him in contrast to many later rulers, he remains enigmatic. Who was he? What is his place of origin? In a compelling article, Claude Jacques asserts that he arrived or returned from Java, perhaps the island of that name, a kingdom in Sumatra or another location, around 770 when he was approximately 20 years old. A 10th century inscription in the Ba Phnom region indicates that one of his early actions was to perform a ceremony that incapacitated Java's rule over sacred Cambodia. The details of the ritual and the reasons behind Jayavarman II's decision to declare his independence at this specific moment are ambiguous. Coedes observed that although the ceremony probably predated the one held on Mount Kulen, it may have been one of several rites conducted across the kingdom as Jayavarman journeyed through these areas during the following 30 years. The references are captivating yet inadequate. Was the ceremony held at Ba Phnom, which is derived from Java? Was there a relationship between Jayavarman II and the ancient spirits of Funan? An inscription, primarily addressing unrelated matters 2 centuries later, acknowledged the significance of the ceremony. Given Ba Phnom's enduring importance as a cult center, especially throughout the 1940s, the second hypothesis seems compelling. Yet, the supporting evidence is inadequate. Jacques, Michael Vickery and Oliver Walters outlined the subsequent stages of Jayavarman's early career, which primarily involved a series of military campaigns and the formation of alliances through marital unions and land grants, with powerful local leaders willing to yield a degree of loyalty to a rising contender for universal authority. An undated inscription delineates the borders of Jayavarman II's realm as China, Champa, the ocean, and the region of cardamoms and mangoes, presumably located to the west. The incorporation of the Angkorian territory into Kambuja Desa extended over 2 decades. No inscriptions from this era have endured, and temples have been small or built with ephemeral materials. The unrecorded years are crucial, since the notions of nationhood and kingship, tailored to the Cambodian setting, have been increasingly significant. Exercise caution while utilizing both terms. Nationhood may have represented little more than having a label, Kambuja Desa, to distinguish one's fellow citizens from foreigners. Cambodians were insiders, vowing allegiance to a particular universal king, whose bond with them reflected Siva's association with the other deities. Although both principles may have originated from Java, they were likely previously familiar to Cambodian Brahmins via Indian statecraft literature. The evidence for these assertions derives from inscriptions produced long after Jayavarman's death. Walters, Vickery, and Jacques have convincingly shown that the future monarch consolidated various locations into a coherent, self-aware community during his travels in Cambodia. Jayavarman II's success in this endeavor and his aims remain ambiguous due to the uncertainty surrounding his reign. The future monarchs esteemed him as the kingdom's founder and as the impetus for a unique viewpoint on Cambodia, in contrast to the achievements of their own, possibly more insular ancestors. Jayavarman II also assumed a more pragmatic function. The folk beliefs of Cambodia typically emphasize the veneration of ancestors, or Nakta, associated with certain locales. The royal capital of Cambodia was founded at Hariharalaya, present-day Roluos, where Jayavarman II ultimately dwelled. Subsequent monarchs esteemed him as a founding ancestral spirit, similar to those honored in every Cambodian hamlet until recently. It is irrational to claim that the Devaraja religion enabled a king's metamorphosis into a deity or a divine sovereign. Yet considerable ceremonial and intellectual evidence suggests that all Cambodian rulers were linked to the deity Siva. This is applicable even if the Devaraja cult was not as prominent as posited by the authors of the Stok Kak Tom inscription and several researchers. The cult was royal rather than the conclusive iteration. Herman Kulka asserts that the cult included a statue of Siva, the Devaraja, or King of the Gods, which was displayed in processions through the streets of Angkor and other royal capitals during festivals, likely to honor the cult's importance at the beginning of the Angkorian period, when Jayavarman II emancipated Cambodia from Java. Other scholars possess differing perspectives. Jayavarman II's offspring, Jayavarman III, succeeded to the kingdom at a tender age, participated in elephant hunting, and died after ruling wisely in 877. The author of this account demonstrated a specific interest in the continuity of the Devaraja religion. The Stok Kak Tom inscription suggests, maybe inaccurately, that the Cambodian rulers who supported the Devaraja cult were the exclusive legal sovereigns of the nation. This probably transpired, especially following the mid-10th century. It is noteworthy that Jayavarman III's successor, the first monarch to undertake a systematic project of temples and inscriptions at Hariharalaya, made only a singular, muted reference to his predecessor, asserting his own legitimacy through ties to relatives of a spouse of Jayavarman II, not the mother of Jayavarman III, and to 2 kings, about whom no additional information has surfaced. This could perpetuate his bloodline beyond Jayavarman's usurpation, connecting him to the pre-Angkorian sovereigns. Indravarman, R877-89, was a usurper, which may elucidate his intricate genealogy. His reign is notable as it is the first occurrence of a triadic pattern of royal behavior defined in the 1930s by art historian Philippe Stern. The preliminary stage entailed funding irrigation initiatives in honor of his subjects and the water deities of the region. During his reign, Indravarman constructed a large reservoir at Hariharalaya to collect rainwater. Known as the Indra Tataka, it covered 300 hectares, about 650 acres. An inscription reveals that upon his ascension to the kingdom, Indravarman pledged, "In 5 days, I shall initiate excavation." Another purpose of these reservoirs was to denote the extent of a king's power and heavenly affiliations by mirroring the geographical features associated with Mount Meru, the mythical dwelling of the gods, where lakes surround the central summit. This North Indian fantasy, set in flooded Cambodia, is laden with irony, akin to the Gothic towers in various US college towns. The second phase entailed a monarch honoring his parents and ancestors by erecting statues, usually representing deities. Indravarman commissioned statues of his parents, his maternal grandparents, Jayavarman II, and his consort, all shown as manifestations of Siva and his consort, within the stuccoed brick temple complex, now known as Preah Ko, Sacred Cow. This remarkable temple, completed in 879, signified the beginning of the Roluo style of Cambodian architecture. This style introduced several traits that would later become significant, including the practice of encircling temples with concentric moats and walls. The complexity of the carving and the dominance of floral themes indicate that the first development of these talents occurred through wood carving. Despite being smaller than later temples, Indravarman's monuments of Preah Ko and Bakong, his temple mountain, exhibited a design and look that was markedly more spectacular than any previous structures. These monuments indicate progress in religious thought and social mobilization, for which further evidence is lacking. An inscription at Preah Ko indicates that Indravarman, after vanquishing unnamed foes, proclaimed himself a global sovereign by constructing a route from the decapitated heads of his haughty competitors for his forces to navigate in combat, analogous to a formidable ocean. The inscription reveals that the creator, Indra, fatigued from generating innumerable kings, fashioned one monarch named Indravarman, signifying protected by Indra, to bestow delight upon the three worlds in a unique manner. Inscriptions far from Roluos suggest that Indravarman briefly maintained alliances in northeastern Thailand and the Mekong Delta. An inscription honoring one of his mentors, who was also a cousin of Jayavarman II, elaborates on the rhetoric above. As the ruler of the realm he had conquered, located on the slopes of Mount Meru, he demonstrated greater constancy than the sun, which was occasionally far. His reign resembled a flawless crown fashioned from a garland of jasmine flowers adorning the esteemed heads of the Chinese monarchs Champa and Yavadvipa. Notwithstanding their elaborate nature, such proclamations about rulers were limited by the deities they aimed to imitate. The poet was thought to excel at layering these qualities while partially concealing some, using metaphors, similes, and puns. Analogous to the passages that outlined the similarities between a monarch and the divine, the temples acted as compendiums and embodiments of the divine realm, serving as a reflected counterpart. In this context, we may perceive the temples as puns, wordplays, and reflections of a parallel realm. Philippe Stern recognized that the final stage of Indravarman's project entailed the erection of a temple mountain. This edifice is called the Bakong and has been erected as a stepped pyramid. The Bakong, unlike the reservoir or Preah Ko, was dedicated to the monarch and would function as his posthumous sarcophagus. Coedes estimated that 13 Angkorian sovereigns erected these temple mountains, commencing with Jayavarman II. Not all, have survived, and interpretations of the extant structures may vary. The first objective was to replicate the renowned mountain, Mount Meru, located north of the Himalayas at the universe's center. Like Mount Meru, they served as sanctuaries for deities and revered individuals, including sovereigns, who had transcended the divine realm. They functioned as sepulchres housing the king's ashes. In specific cases, including Angkor Wat, they functioned as astronomical observatories. Bakong was the first Cambodian temple built primarily of stone instead of brick. In addition to the 8th century temple of Akyom, it was the inaugural structure to display a pyramidal shape. In the 1930s, French archaeologists reconstructed the temple. Nevertheless, nearly all of its bas-reliefs had disappeared by that time. Yasovarman, the progeny of Indravarman, reigned from 889 until perhaps 910, and was a notable sovereign. His inscriptions and structures demonstrate an ambition to eclipse his father's accomplishments and consolidate Cambodia around a royal metropolis. Yasodharapura, the city of Angkor, maintained its designation until its abandonment in the 1500s. Yasovarman's inaugural official action appears to have been the creation of 100 religious hermitages, each equipped with a royal rest house and a set of laws. Researchers have identified 12 virtually identical inscriptions associated with these hermitages. 2 are situated in proximity to Roluos. 6 of the remaining people hail from southeastern Cambodia, where Yasovarman, through his maternal lineage, claimed ancestral connections to pre-Angkorian periods. The abundance of inscriptions suggests that Kambuja Desa was becoming an established concept and an ideal. Subsequently, Yasovarman honored his parents by erecting 4 brick temples, Lole, on an island he fashioned within his father's reservoir. In the northeastern corner of the reservoir, a conventional orientation in Cambodian religious ideology, he erected an elevated expressway going northwest towards the location, 16 kilometers, 10 miles, away, where he planned to establish his capital city. This region presently encompasses the Angkor complex. Yasovarman's desire to build a temple mountain on a natural hill undoubtedly influenced his choice of Angkor. His alternatives were a hill, Phnom Krom, adjacent to the Tonle Sap, and another, Phnom Bok, near a considerable distance. He constructed little temples on these 2 hills. He constructed his primary temple atop the hill now known as Phnom Bakeng, or Phnom Kandal, Central Mountain, which is situated near the center of the Angkor complex. The Stok Kak Tom inscription states that Yasovarman established the royal city of Sri Yasodharapura and relocated the Devaraja from Hariharalaya to this city. He then erected a central mountain, Phnom Kandal. It was not until the 1930s that Yasovarman identified his peak as Phnom Bakeng. In both design and execution, it is markedly more magnificent than any of his father's edifices. Jean Filiozat has performed comprehensive research on its ramifications. Upon individual and communal examination, he has identified that the quantities of floors, statues, towers, and staircases match specific numbers, notably 33 and 108, which have spiritual importance in Indian religion. In specific cases, pilgrims approaching the monument could identify this reference by counting the visible towers. Yasovarman built the Yasodharatataka reservoir to the east of Phnom Bakeng, which measures around 6.5 kilometers in length and 3 kilometers in width. He established monasteries along the southern coastline for sects that venerated Siva, Vishnu, and the Buddha. He commanded the construction of temples on natural heights throughout his domain, the most notable being Preah Vihear, situated on a cliff that currently marks the border between Cambodia and Thailand. These activities suggest that Yasovarman could mobilize a considerably larger labor force than his predecessors. Yasovarman's inscriptions reveal that he was a cosmopolitan sovereign, aware of the grandeur of Indian civilization and receptive to various religious beliefs. The sources provide limited information about his political activities, associations, or unique ideology. We have compelling insights into administrative reforms, including evidence that Yasovarman's legal code mandated punishments based on an individual's financial capabilities, and a suggestion that taxes were efficiently collected in kind throughout the kingdom. We must predominantly acknowledge assertions of his greatness, such as he was a lion man. He devastated the enemy with the claws of his magnificence. His teeth symbolized his policies. His eyes embodied the Veda. His glory reverberated internationally. His virtues defined his identity. In Sanskrit poetry, the phrase, "his eyes were the Veda," deliberately utilizes double entendres since the verb to see, and the noun sacred teaching demonstrates parallelism. The dual significances are evident in various places throughout Angkorian poetry and the construction of the temples. Yasovarman died around 910. Two of his sons succeeded him in succession. There is scant information about them, and by 921 a brother of one of Yasovarman's consorts was founded in a rival city at Khmer, situated in a challenging area around 100 kilometers, 62 miles, north of Angkor. The competitor began grand projects, including building a reservoir and starting a Temple Mountain initiative. In 928, after the demise of the reigning monarch in Yasodharapura, the Khmer sovereign proclaimed himself king, adopting the title Jayavarman IV. The construction of his Temple Mountain, Prasat Tom, continued until around 930. The temple housed a lingam roughly 18 meters, 59 feet in height, and 5 meters, 16 feet, in width feet, in diameter, presumably composed of metal or enclosed in metal, as it has since disappeared, making it the highest temple completed in Cambodia, aside from Angkor Wat. 25 inscriptions of Jayavarman IV asserted that the construction surpassed that of preceding emperors. We lack knowledge based on his substantial self-esteem, the traits of his adherents, or the motivations for his choice to transfer the capital from Yasodharapura. Notwithstanding the ostensibly superficial or flamboyant character of Jayavarman IV's claims, it is clear that he effectively governed a significant population at Khmer with tremendous magnificence for 2 decades, whether using compulsion or persuasion. The site consists of around 40 temples constructed throughout this short period. His influence probably reached northeastern Thailand, where numerous temples in the Khmer style are preserved. After his demise in 942, one of his sons briefly assumed the kingdom, and in 944, a nephew from his maternal ancestry, also a nephew of Yasovarman, returned to Yasodharapura as King Rajendravarman. A later inscription states that this monarch restored the sacred city of Yasodharapura, previously deserted, and augmented its magnificence and charm by erecting residences adorned with radiant gold and palaces embellished with precious gems, resembling the terrestrial palace of Indra. Although there is scant information about Rajendravarman's reign, his imitation of practices initiated by Yasovarman, such as the erection of a temple for his ancestors in the middle of a lake, implies his desire to rejuvenate Angkorian kingship rather than to found a new dynasty or align himself with Jayavarman's transient dynasty at Khmer. Rajendravarman constructed 2 magnificent temple mountains, Mabon and Prerup, along with countless more temples, particularly in the northern area. In addition to a victorious campaign against Champa, his reign was peaceful and marked the beginning of a prosperous era in Angkor that lasted for over a century. The linguistic sophistication of Rajendravarman's Sanskrit inscriptions exemplifies this affluence. The Prerup stele contains over 300 stanzas praising Rajendravarman's ancestry, intellect, and rule as king. Another aspect of his rule was the commercial growth of the Khmer kingdom westward into contemporary northeastern Thailand. A third was his official endorsement of Buddhism. Rajendravarman embraced Buddhism, and the minister overseeing public works was a prominent Buddhist during his reign. Rajendra Varman died in 968 and was replaced by his son Jayavarman V, a youngster who appeared to have spent several years under the careful supervision of relatives and high officials. These men and their families are prominently represented in the carefully constructed inscriptions that have endured from his reign. Banteay Shrey, a remarkable temple in the Angkor region, was consecrated by an official who served as Jayavarman's mentor at the beginning of the reign. Evidence indicates that this complex little temple, carved from pink sandstone, formerly held considerable importance in an urban area located roughly 16 kilometers, 10 miles, north of the main Angkor complex. In 1916, a French surveying party discovered the temple in a thickly wooded region. Despite being a Shaivite, similar to his father and many Brahmins at court, Jayavarman V demonstrated tolerance towards Buddhism, leading to the expansion of Buddhist research throughout his reign. From this period, an exceptional inscription from Wat Sithor in Kompong Cham exemplifies the disarray that has infiltrated Buddhist philosophy in Cambodia. It integrates aspects of Buddhism and Shaivism, leading Emile Senart, a 19th century scholar, to observe, "Everywhere one senses a manifest preoccupation to disturb people's habits as little as possible, and to submerge deep differences inside surface similarities." Inscriptions downplay Jayavarman V's role as a builder of temple mountains. The Takeo temple, his own, remains unfinished. The demise of Jayavarman V in 1001 precipitated a chaotic and ruinous period. However, by 1003, an unidentified monarch succeeded to the throne at Angkor, albeit without control over the rest of the kingdom. Multiple inscriptions in the north alluded to a prince named Suryavarman, who became king as Suryavarman I. Some experts assert that neither of these rulers had Cambodian ancestry. Michael Vickery has recently established that Suryavarman was probably a Cambodian from an aristocratic family associated with the northeastern portion of the kingdom. The technique utilized by Suryavarman to attain dominance in the early 11th century closely resembles that of Jayavarman 2 centuries prior. This process involved sporadic conflict and the formation of alliances, via coercion, marriage, and persuasion, that enabled the claimant to reduce or placate the power of local leaders. Vickery asserted that Suryavarman had powerful allies among the priestly families that influenced Angkor's governance, and contemporary inscriptions indicate his gradual westward movement toward a partially depopulated capital over several years, reflecting the intricacy of his alliances. The inscription reveals that Suryavarman won in his final fight against a king accompanied by other kings. Despite his apparent personal non-adherence to the religion, a significant facet of his rise to prominence is his endorsement of Buddhism. Adverse inscriptions suggest that upon rising to power, he obliterated Vra, or religious icons, yet the implications of this allegation remain unclear. If Suryavarman had embraced Buddhism, the devastation could have been perceived as mere iconoclasm. It is likely linked to delegitimizing certain religious groups, whose benefactors were hesitant or uncooperative with him. Another inscription reveals that during his reign, the king deliberately impoverished privileged individuals who had amassed considerable wealth, presenting substantial political dangers. Upon landing in Yasodharapura, Suryavarman's first step was to organize a public pledge of allegiance from over 4,000 officials, known as Tamarak, at the freshly constructed royal palace. The oath is preserved in a comprehensive inscription, the only instance of its type, which asserts that the officials shall maintain allegiance to the king and additionally articulates, "If we fail to honor our oath to His Majesty, may he enjoy a prolonged reign. We implore him to administer all manners of royal retribution upon us, if we hide ourselves to evade the fulfillment of this oath. Let us be reborn in the 32nd inferno, for as long as the sun and moon persist." The concluding stipulation of the oath pertains to compensation due to people faithful to their master. the creation of religious institutions, and support for families. Loyalty was to be rewarded with the privilege of extracting surpluses from territories governed by Khmers, who were unified in their allegiance to the king. The oath represents an enhancement of royal authority and the creation of a newly established or reformed elite linked to land governance. Suryavarman's rule was characterized by the augmentation of multiple aspects of kingship, which occurred during an era when bureaucratic power rivaled or surpassed that of the monarch. Suryavarman expanded Angkorian authority by instituting new religious establishments at the western edge of the Tonle Sap. Concurrently, he annexed the Theravada Buddhist kingdom of Luvo, situated in contemporary Lopburi, central Thailand. He enhanced the hydraulic infrastructure at Angkor, suggesting that his additional initiatives had increased the city's population. During Suryavarman's reign, the roles of the priesthood and bureaucracy, sometimes indistinguishable in practice, became formalized. State-sponsored religious institutions functioned as conduits for government funding and patronage in murky ways, perhaps connected to the power of priestly bureaucratic families affiliated with the monarchy. His government was marked by urbanization. Henri Mestrier du Bourg, a French scholar, has established that throughout the three prior reigns, over 20 toponyms in inscriptions ended with the suffix pura, signifying city, e.g. Singapore, the Lion City. Under Suryavarman, this number increased to 47, demonstrating that his rise to power involved concentrating inhabitants into urban centers from less strictly administered rural areas. Certain puras may have been cities just in title, intended to enhance the status of local elites. Yet, the evidence for urbanization corresponds with other established facets of Suryavarman's rule. Evidence suggests that merchants engaged in domestic and international trade became progressively more active throughout Suryavarman's reign. Historically, the primary population of these persons in Cambodia has been ethnically diverse, including Chams, Chinese, and Vietnamese. Inscriptions from the reign of Suryavarman suggest a more frequent reference to merchants as a collective entity. Traditionally, foreign trade entailed the barter of natural products from wooded regions for refined items like textiles or ceramics. However, as Kenneth Hall has demonstrated, Cambodians also engaged in the exchange of commodities such as land, rice, buffalo, and enslaved individuals for manufactured or exotic goods from other nations during this period. This economic activity transpired without standardized units of value or official money, continuing well into Cambodia's middle period. During Suryavarman's reign, the administration employed administrative and coercive strategies to concentrate the populace in Yasodarapura. This approach diverged from previous methods, demonstrating to later monarchs that the kingdom could be structured and expanded by ensuring its agrarians labored year-round. The sustenance required to sustain the apparatus, priests, kings, bureaucrats, and soldiers, could not be provided by the singular annual harvests that had previously been adequate for the survival of ordinary individuals. Suryavarman capitalized on the benefits of usurpation to expand his authority. At the onset of his rule, he had the autonomy to select and reward his loyal adherents, instead of being constrained by sycophants from other courts. Initially, the new officials' administration of the country resulted in an increased focus on local matters, as these officials retained obligations to their rural constituents that their successors may overlook. Uttadityavarman II, R 1050-66, the successor of Suryavarman, was a fervent follower of Siva. Under the guidance of a formidable teacher, he rekindled interest in the Devaraja worship and the tradition of constructing a monumental temple mountain, the Bapuon, to enshrine the lingam linked to his reign. According to an inscription engraved by his successor, observing the emergence of a golden mountain in the center of Jambudvipa, the abode of the deities, he constructed a golden mountain at the heart of his city in imitation. At the pinnacle of this mountain, within a resplendent golden temple radiating celestial luminosity, he established a Sivalinga crafted from gold. There are three perspectives on Cambodian kingship during its zenith at Angkor. It is essential to analyze the king's connection with Siva. In 1933, Paul Moose presented a compelling essay asserting that Siva's prominence in ancient Southeast Asia stemmed primarily from his dual identity as both an earth spirit and an ancestral spirit. Initially, he was believed to emerge from the earth, symbolizing the ancestors as a rock protrusion, subsequently intentionally manifesting as a lingam representing the ancestors, and ultimately as a depiction of the rulers and ancestors of a specific locale. In this context, Siva was a literary representation of an ancestral spirit, tasked with enriching the earth by precipitating rainfall in his designated area. This facet of Cambodian monarchy, also present in Southeast Asia, notably Vietnam, persisted in rural areas until the 1960s. Siva and his consort, Uma, were deities to whom sacrifices, including buffalo or human people, were offered as they were believed to sanctify what resided beneath the earth. Interestingly, when considered from this perspective, the Cambodian king, as a supporter of agriculture, resembles a Chinese emperor more closely than a Raja of classical India. The responsibilities of a Cambodian king encompassed more than only invoking rainfall or securing the satisfaction of ancestral spirits. From the viewpoint of the populace, an alternative perspective on Cambodian kingship is to see it as the king's continual and ritualistic demonstration of authority and preeminence in warfare, sexuality, poetry, material wealth, ceremonies, and similar domains. Viewed in this manner, the king was neither an earth spirit nor a priest, but rather the protagonist of an Indian epic. The majority of Sanskrit inscriptions in Cambodia conveyed this perspective. They lauded monarchs as embodiments of virtue and paragons above societal norms. They associated kings with the heavens, the sun, Indra, Vishnu, and Rama, rather than terrestrial or supernatural powers. Kings, regarded as living superlatives, served as a reference point for poets, acting as a pole star around which society metaphorically structured itself, beginning with the Varnas closest to the king and extending to free individuals, rice-growing villagers, and enslaved persons. The king has superhuman qualities yet offers no practical assistance. He was a hero, rising to the apex of society via his merit and influence. The Angkorian elite's recreation of nobility served at least two purposes. The primary aim was to demonstrate heavenly conduct, e.g., erecting a temple mountain as a model of mount, Meru, or defeating innumerable foes, to obtain benefits for the sovereign and the kingdom. The meticulous execution of rituals, especially concerning timing, was crucial to their efficacy. In this context, the term symbol is devoid of significance. The sovereign maintained confidence in the rituals. His advisors did likewise. He had a belief in his kingship, which he demonstrated through ceremonies. A third perspective on kingship is viewed through everyday Cambodian life. Sanskrit inscriptions hold far less value in this setting than Cambodian inscriptions. Although society at Angkor appears rigidly hierarchical, the inscriptions disclose complex networks of relationships, obligations, and expectations in which all mentioned individuals are interconnected. From this perspective, the monarch was the most entangled as a polygamist, patron, and nomenclator. Ian Mabbitt's thorough analysis of Angkorian kingship clarifies the broad spectrum of duties, support, and knowledge expected of a sovereign. This included bestowing titles and insignia upon senior officials, distributing land and enslaved individuals to religious institutions, creating and maintaining irrigation systems, constructing, decorating, and staffing temples, and overseeing foreign relations, particularly with Champa to the east of the capital and various tributary states to the north and west. The king served as the Supreme Court of Appeal, and the inscriptions reveal that small conflicts over landholdings frequently progressed through the judicial system to reach him, a characteristic of kingship that persisted until the 1960s. Concurrently, despite the scant information offered by the inscriptions, a king was required to possess adept political acumen to survive. Mabet has observed that many Sanskrit inscriptions praise the wisdom of monarchs by likening them to Rama, or alluding to their knowledge of Indian political literature. Although these academic books functioned as political guides, granting Cambodian monarchs significant flexibility, the inscriptions provide scant insight into quotidian choices, conflicts, and resolutions. The quintessence of court life during the Angkorian era remains inaccessible. The Khmer inscriptions offer significant insights into many layers of Cambodian society, encompassing free and enslaved individuals, though exclusively during the events recorded, memorialized, or honored by the inscriptions. Mabet's analysis of slavery at Angkor builds upon earlier studies by Y. Bongert and A. Chakravarti, which elucidates the various complexities of the classifications given to those we identify as enslaved individuals and the diverse jobs allocated to them. As stated in Chapter 2, it is now impractical to classify the concepts diachronically or across the corpus of inscriptions. There are examples of enslaved individuals who enslaved others, enslaved persons who married royalty, and free individuals who were stigmatized similarly to enslaved people. Retroactively analyzing historical periods shows that most persons at Angkor were subjects, arias, rather than objects or autonomous entities. Patrons might reassign them to others, and in many cases, exclude inferior individuals. The inscriptions classify enslaved humans as property. These guys were undoubtedly the giants once thought to have built Angkor. The bas-reliefs on the Bayon suggest that the tools, clothing, and housing experienced negligible changes from the Angkorian period to the French Protectorate era. The bas-reliefs depict their domesticated animals, recreational activities, trade, jesters, shamans, ascetics, and merchants. However, humans exhibit diminished stability when recreating their beliefs or collective narratives. We cannot discern any significant writing from Angkor. The absence of written documentation hinders a clear representation of the general inhabitants of Angkor, depending exclusively on their artifacts, including reservoirs, temples, stone and bronze sculptures, tools, and pottery. What were the sentiments of an enslaved person at Angkor towards their master? Should one imitate, disdain, avoid, or revere a mentor? To what degree did recognizable Indian notions, deities, and terminology permeate societal frameworks or individual awareness? The population demonstrated superior literacy in Khmer compared to Sanskrit. Nonetheless, there is a lack of evidence concerning the instructional methods for literacy in both languages. The portrayal illustrates an acquaintance with Indian culture, especially among the elite, which wanes in the wider population, culminating in rural areas where ancestor spirits are designated Hindu names and Hindu monuments are venerated as ancestral deities. Cambodia's emulation of India excluded the adoption of the Indian caste system. Nevertheless, Mabet established in a distinct, thorough article that the monarch utilized several rituals based on Varna nomenclature as part of his patronage repertory. The king intermittently conferred caste status upon his clients, or those affiliated with his associates. Aside from the establishment of a dynasty, a Cambodian king, similar to most Chinese emperors, could rule exclusively by broadening networks of patronage and mutual obligations from his palace, initially through close associates and family, but progressively depending on local power holders at the kingdom's periphery. Inhabitants remote from Angkor probably have minimal knowledge of the king's identity, akin to the circumstances in the early 20th century, as recorded by French ethnographers examining the Cambodian community in southern Vietnam. Canals and routes were absent in antiquity. Only forests populated by tigers, elephants, and wild buffaloes prevented residents from exploring beyond their towns. As a result, a limited number of folks frequented the royal city. If someone successfully navigated it by paddling his canoe, others would seek to learn about the experience. What is the king's physical visage? Is he comparable to an ordinary person? The traveller, noting the questions of the ignorant public, would reply, "The king has a polished and exquisite appearance, unmarred by dirt or sweat. He bears no scars." However, it often transpired that the traveller had never met the king directly. Cambodia's last years of the 11th century were marked by upheaval and disintegration. At different times, 2 or 3 monarchs competed for the title of absolute sovereign. At the century's close, a new dynasty began its reign over Angkor, lasting nearly a century. There is no evidence about the first 2 rulers, Jayavarman VI and his brother Dharanindravarman I, yet their nephew, Suryavarman II, who directed the construction of Angkor Wat, resembled Yasovarman II and Suryavarman III, another unifying emperor. His inscriptions suggest that he attained power at a young age, having prevailed in a confrontation against a rival prince. Abandoning the breadth of his army on the battlefield, he surged to the forefront of the enemy king's elephant and dispatched him as a Garuda would vanquish a serpent on a mountainside. Suryavarman II was the first ruler to preside over a unified Cambodian kingdom after the demise of Uttiyadityavarman II in the 1060s. The parallels with Suryavarman I, who was probably unrelated, are numerous and illuminating. Both monarchs ascended to the throne during periods of division and conflict. After seizing Yasodharapura, they instituted stringent administrative procedures, embraced a pragmatic approach to governance, and enlarged their area and labor force. Suryavarman II executed military operations in the east, focusing on Vietnam, perhaps with Chinese assistance, and Champa, deploying mercenaries primarily recruited from the tributary territories to the west, and utilizing Chams in actions against Vietnam. He established diplomatic connections with China, becoming the first Angkorian ruler. He erected numerous notable temples in northeastern Thailand, notably Pi Mai and Phanom Rung, under his rule. Like Suryavarman I, he sought to differentiate himself religiously from his direct predecessors. Suryavarman I achieved this by endorsing Buddhism, although his namesake exhibited an unusual dedication to Vishnu for a Cambodian monarch. In all cases, new or specific regulations were linked to activities that granted them legitimacy. These actions connected the monarchs to pre-Angkorian pilgrimage sites like Wat Phru, spiritual leaders affiliated with prior kings, and artistic traditions that originated from the reigns of their vanquished predecessors. Suryavarman II's veneration for Vishnu led him to commission Angkor Wat, the largest, possibly the most magnificent, and indisputably one of the most enigmatic buildings of Angkor, functioning as a temple, mausoleum, and observatory. The temple spans an area of 200 hectares, about 500 acres. The construction began at the start of Suryavarman II's reign. His demise about 1150, over a century after the prior Temple Mountain. The Bapuon postponed its completion. Recent findings offer substantial evidence that the central statue of Vishnu, previously missing, was consecrated in July 1131, presumably aligning with Suryavarman's 33rd birthday, holding enormous cosmic significance in Indian religion. Which elements of the temple are mysterious? It initially faces west, being the only notable construction in Yasodharapura to do so. Additionally, one should navigate the bas-reliefs, which extend for almost a mile around the temple's outer galleries in a counterclockwise direction, commencing at the northwest quadrant. The conventional practice of viewing a bas-relief or circumambulating a temple entailed keeping it on the right side while moving in a clockwise direction, known in Sanskrit as pradaksina. Owing to apparent meteorological reasons, The reverse direction was generally correlated with the deceased. The west was likewise associated. In contemporary Khmer, the word meaning west also denotes sink or drown. Therefore, several French experts have suggested that Angkor Wat primarily functioned as a mausoleum, unlike the other temples at Angkor. Discussions continued in academic publications until 1940, when Coedes proposed that Angkor Wat, along with 15 additional royal Cambodian monuments, be classified as a temple and a tomb. He mentioned stone vessels, likely sarcophagi that housed some of the treasure from these other temples. Coedes claimed that the unconventional orientation of Angkor Wat would have served as an homage to Vishnu, the patron deity of Suryavarman, often associated with the West. Angkor Wat is the only temple in Angkor that is recognized as having been dedicated to him. The 12th century saw a vigorous revival of Vaishnavism, associated with popular religion in the Indian subcontinent. This renaissance, similar to other events in Indian religion, seems to have had effects in Angkor. Between 1940 and the 1970s, minimal scholarly research was undertaken on Angkor Wat. Scholars and visitors appreciated the artistry of its bas-reliefs, mostly illustrating the bravery of Rama. The complex, yet formidable scale of the temple, and its lasting impact on the consciousness of ordinary Cambodians. In the mid-1970s, Eleanor Moron initiated a comprehensive examination of the temple's measurements, positing that they could reveal the encoding utilized by the learned architects who constructed it. Upon learning that the Cambodian unit of measurement, the hat, equates to approximately 0.4 meters, 1.3 feet, Moron inquired about the number of hats required to ascertain significant temple dimensions, such as the distance from the central tower to the western door, the sole entry with a causeway. The distance amounted to 1,728 hats, while 3 supplementary components on this axis measured 1,296, 867, and 439. Moron subsequently asserted that these figures aligned with the 4 ages, or yugas, of Indian philosophy. The Krita Yuga, the earliest epoch, was allegedly a golden age lasting 1.728 million years. The following 3 epochs lasted 1.296 million, 864,000, and 432,000 years, respectively. The earliest age was 4 times greater than the latest. The second earliest was 3 times more, and the third earliest was twice as great. The present age is referred to as the Kali Yuga. Following this era, it is asserted that Brahma would obliterate and regenerate the universe, initiating a new golden age. The correlation between the durations of these 4 epochs and distinct distances along the east-west axis of Angkor Wat implies that the temple's code is a linguistic construct that can be analyzed in relation to time and space. The distances covered by a person entering the temple reflect the eras that the visitor symbolically encounters while advancing toward the Vishnu statue in the central tower. The visitor advances eastward, departing from the west, which symbolizes death, while concurrently retracing time to the point proposed by indigenous peoples as the origin of time. In her research, Moron established astronomical correlations for 10 frequently repeated distances at Angkor Wat. Astronomers working with her determined that the temple site was aligned with the Western Gate's orientation towards the sunrise, over a tiny hill to the northeast, Phnom Bok. Moreover, during the summer solstice, an observer situated directly in front of the western entrance might witness the dawn straight over the central tower of Angkor Wat. June 21st marked the initiation of the solar year for Indian astronomers and bore holy significance for King Suryavarman, meaning protected by the sun, a devotee of Vishnu. The spatial relationships correspond effectively with the notions of cosmic time, and all measurements at Angkor exhibit remarkable precision and symmetry. This supports the idea that the temple served as an enigmatic religious text that academics could decipher by navigating its corridors between dimensions. The scholars who defined the measurements of Angkor Wat would have acknowledged and valued its numerous interpretations. Individuals with lower social standing would comprehend fewer meanings. It is plausible to assume that even the most destitute enslaved individuals were both astonished and pleased to witness this monumental temple, presumably adorned with gilded towers rising 60 meters, 200 feet, above the ground, above its glistening moat, and the thatched abodes of its creators. Suryavarman II likely initiated a battle against Vietnam in 1150, although the precise date of his death is indeterminate. The interval between 1145 and 1182 yielded almost no inscriptions, necessitating the reconstruction of its history from later sources. The successor of Suryavarman, presumably a cousin, rose to the kingdom under mysterious circumstances, likely via a coup d'état. The newly ascended king, Dharanendravarman, appears to have been a fervent Buddhist. But it is conceivable that he never governed as king at Yasodharapura. Yasovarman II ascended to the throne following Jayavarman VII in 1150, as documented in one of the latter's inscriptions. The inscription credits Yasovarman with quelling a mysterious rebellion in the northwest. The inscription reveals that the organizers of this insurrection were neither outsiders nor members of the elite. In the bas-reliefs in the temple of Bante Chmar, they are shown as beings with animal heads. The uprising, reminiscent of the 1970s communist insurgency, would have been seen as unimaginable, coordinated by the marginalized segments of society and the forest people, against an allegedly invulnerable elite. Instability continued throughout the 1160s. A subordinate murdered Yasovarman and declared himself king. The tributary kingdom of Luvo sent tributary emissaries to China, suggesting a certain level of autonomy for Angkor. The absence of inscriptions and the questionable legitimacy of rulers heighten the illusion of rapid change. As B.P. Grolier has noted, the kingdom's hydraulic system began to decline during the reign of Suryavarman II. This network of lakes and canals ensured one crop annually during arid periods and 2 harvests during sufficiently rainy seasons. This constituted the foundation of Angkor's rice-centric agricultural economy, enabling substantial populations, potentially up to 600,000, to inhabit relatively low-density regions. Grolier posits that the system was most efficacious circa the mid-11th century. As a century later, the hydraulic components of Angkor Wat were significantly diminished compared to those in preceding temple highlands. Grolier contends that, under the rule of Suryavarman II, hydraulically designed settlements were established at considerable distances from Angkor, notably at Beng Mealia and Kompong Svai, representing a precedent in Cambodian history. This may have sprung from the exhaustion of sustainable water resources in the Angkor region. However, new studies suggest that this peak was reached in the 13th century. Water originates from a system of small streams descending southward from the Kulin Highlands to the north, along the gradual slope towards the coasts of Tonle Sap. As water needs intensified, these streams were progressively redirected toward their origins. This procedure reduced the nutrients the streams provided to nourish the Angkorian plain. The slight gradient of the plain led to almost stagnant canals during arid seasons, especially when unstable political circumstances, conflict or diseases reduced the workforce usually designated for their upkeep. Grolier and other scholars have suggested that this increasing standstill may have corresponded with the advent of malaria on the Southeast Asian mainland, intensifying the issue. Typically, we lack dependable statistics or comprehensive assertions regarding the situation at Angkor. These would assist in comprehending aspects such as the population size and composition at various periods, the condition of the water infrastructure throughout those times, and the relationship, or absence thereof, between different monarchs and effective agricultural practices. The interrelations of water management, grain production, priesthood, and temple foundations that characterized Angkor parallel the social organization of ancient Egypt and exhibit similarities with specific elements of the Maya civilization in medieval Guatemala. In every case, grain surpluses, wheat, rice, or maize, were accumulated to benefit the state and its prevailing ideologues, the priests, who served as patrons of temples and counselors to the rulers. The Angkorian economy was predominantly based on rice and other commodities generated by temple foundations, augmented by income from exchanging forest products and minerals with neighboring states. Michael Coe observed that taxes seemed to be levied on multiple goods, such as land, rice, salt, wax, and honey. Payments may be made for numerous types of items, including: the economy of Angkor is a significant research domain, with enslaved individuals, buffaloes, elephants, and, notably, textiles. Economists can build upon Vickery's previous research and the findings derived from the current Greater Angkor project at the University of Sydney. Jayavarman VII. Only a single dated Cambodian inscription has endured from the death of Suryavarman II in 1150 to the coronation of Jayavarman VII in 1182. A significant portion of our understanding of this era is derived from inscriptions commissioned by Jayavarman, which convey his perspective of the world and the narrative he wished to propagate about his early life. Due to his seemingly questionable legitimacy as a contender for the throne, his formative years, as well as those of several Cambodian founder kings, are inadequately chronicled. George Coates compiled Jayavarman's biography, perceiving him as a zenith of Cambodian history rather than an anomaly. Jayavarman's inscriptions and their implications reveal significant divergences from preceding narratives. Due to his radicalism and magnificence, Jayavarman VII has largely overshadowed the historiography of Cambodia, especially following Coedes's scholarship in the 1930s. His reign encompassed numerous enigmas and inconsistencies. Contemporary scholars have challenged Coedes's hagiography. Jayavarman was a member of the Mahiharapura dynasty. He was a first cousin of Suryavarman II and the progeny of a royal prince, Dharanendravarman, who may have temporarily served as king and was undoubtedly a devout Buddhist. B.P. Grosslier questions the validity of the first allegation due to its inadequate documentation and its implication that Jayavarman is in the direct line of succession, complicating the facts of his life further. It appears probable that Jayavarman in his youth held a position at Yasovarman's court. Between 1166 and 1177, Jayavarman seemingly resided outside Angkor, maybe at the temple currently referred to as Preah Khan in Kompong Svai, where Claude Jacques has identified the city of Jayadityapura, as well as in Champa. Researchers have uncovered a portrait statue of Jayavarman at Preah Khan in Kompong Svai, which is evidently older than subsequent statues from his reign. Was the city subordinate to Angkor or a competitor? What was Jayavarman's relationship with the usurper monarch who succeeded Yasovarman on the throne? Moreover, what were his connections with Champa to the east? We must pose these somewhat unanswerable questions to contextualize Jayavarman's reign. Following his accession in 1178, within the parameters of his early life and the landscape of Cambodian foreign relations. Throughout his life, Jayavarman appears to have deeply engaged with the doctrines of Mahayana Buddhism, the variation still practiced in much of northern Asia. He exerted greater effort than any other monarch to amalgamate Buddhism with Cambodian concepts of kingship. As he implemented it, Buddhist kingship diverged in multiple aspects from the more diverse Hindu paradigm that had been adhered to for centuries at Angkor, and would serve as the ceremonial foundation of Cambodian kingship, until the institution was briefly abolished in 1970. In the conventional narrative, a monarch was believed to possess a unique connection with a specific deity, typically Siva, less frequently Vishnu, and occasionally the amalgamation of both referred to as Harihara, regardless of his mortal status, to whom his temple mountain was ultimately consecrated. Monarchs utilized this unique relationship to justify their magnificence, whereas subjects attributed it to sufficient precipitation. Due to the hierarchical structure of Cambodian society and the perception of the king as a unifying figure, most Cambodians, as to their medieval European counterparts, likely acknowledged the essential role of a monarch. Infrequent inscriptions, along with the potential creation of reservoirs, suggested that a particular monarch occasionally considered the overall well-being of his subjects. In human terms, the monarch was predominantly an enigmatic figure, often shrouded behind an imposing palace. The concept of his accountability to his constituents has failed to resonate. Within his palace and the intricate web of familial and preferential ties emanating from it, the king was both the sovereign and the prey of a system in which individuals vied for his patronage, titles, and the privilege to possess enslaved people or opulent goods. Buddhist royalty, inherently derived from the Indian tradition, since the Buddha was an Indian prince, underwent several modifications during Jayavarman's reign. Individuals no longer perceived Jayavarman as a devotee of a deity, or as being elevated to it in death. Jayavarman endeavored to atone for himself and his country via his commitment to Buddhist doctrines and the execution of virtuous deeds. Before analyzing the implementation of these concepts of kingship throughout his reign, it is essential to emphasize that his agenda did not seek to reform Cambodian society or dismantle Hinduized institutions such as Brahmanism, slavery, and kingship. The contrary was, in fact, accurate. Jayavarman VII, characterized by his conservatism, persistent tolerance of Hinduism and aristocratic perspective, epitomized a 12th century monarch. However, in the context of Cambodia, he may also be regarded as a revolutionary figure. The distinction between a Hindu monarch and a Buddhist ruler is comparable to an unheard monologue and a soliloquy directed at an audience of compensated or invited attendees. The reign of a Hindu king comprised a collection of declarations, rituals, temples, poetry, marriages, inscriptions, and similar elements that showcased his magnificence, intellect, and divinity. A Buddhist monarch articulated comparable assertions, directing many of them explicitly to his subjects. This rendered the populace less a component of the king's grandeur, as his multitude of adherents had perpetually been, and more as subjects of his benevolence, spectators of his virtuous deeds, and contributors to his salvation. This message is conveyed by numerous inscriptions and temples attributed to Jayavarman VII. What motivated Jayavarman VII to sever ties with tradition? Academics propose multiple explanations. This encompasses his evident alienation from the court at Angkor, coupled with his animosity toward the usurper, who declared himself king in 1167, as well as his possession of a master plan for architecture, ideology, and kingship that had been developing in his mind after years of study, likely influenced by a learned and ambitious spouse. These recommendations are beneficial but fail to recognize the pivotal event of Jayavarman's reign, the Cham invasion of Angkor in 1177. Pulmus and Jean Boisselier contend that Jayavarman's entire reign might be interpreted as a reaction to this tragic occurrence. Jayavarman maintained a close association with Champa. During the 1160s, he likely resided there for several years. His exile from Angkor was probably linked to his loss of favor at the Cambodian court, as he returned only after the deposition of Yasovarman II. The origins of our uncertainty stem from Jayavarman's own inscriptions. Thus, what is evident regarding the lead-up to the Cham invasion of 1177, and indeed Jayavarman's early career, is that he later had scant accomplishments to highlight from these evidently formative years, some of which he may have spent in his mother's native city of Jayadityapura east of Angkor. Inscriptions often attribute the origins of war to royal ambition, treachery, and revenge, elements reminiscent of the Ramayana, making it challenging to ascertain the precise motivations behind Champa's invasion of Cambodia, which occurred by land in 1177 and possibly by water in 1178. As did recollections of prior defeats, The allure of plunder and captives likely influenced the Cham rationale. The expedition proceeded to the Great Lake and the Siem Reap River, capturing the city of Yasodharapura unexpectedly. With a formidable fleet, he looted it and executed the king, disregarding any peace proposals. Jayavarman seems to have been in Champa during the invasion of 1177. In the subsequent year, he mobilized a diverse Khmer Cham army to launch a new offensive against the Chams at Angkor, achieving victory in battle. However, an inscription indicates that it was a Cambodian prince, rather than Jayavarman himself, who fatally struck the Cham king with 100 million arrows. Upon his arrival at Angkor post-invasion, Jayavarman discovered the city immersed in a sea of misfortune and burdened by crimes. His challenges were partly attributable to the poor governance of preceding monarchs, and partly to the fragmentation of power within the kingdom, as noted in a message from his wife. In the prior reign, the land, though sheltered by numerous parasols, endured extreme heat. Under Jayavarman, only one parasol remained, yet remarkably, the land was liberated from suffering mounds. Jayavarman VII ascended to the throne in 1182–83, attributing his success mostly to his intellect, Buddhist devotion, and military triumphs rather than to his predecessors. It is evident, however, that the interval between triumph and the acquisition of authority was likely characterized by political talks and more conflicts, possibly including the numerous parasols. In the subsequent 30 years, the exact date of his demise remains uncertain. He indelibly imprinted the kingdom with his image and ideologies, unparalleled by any ruler before Norodom Sihanouk in the 1960s and Pol Pot thereafter. Like these two characters, Jayavarman may have aspired to alter Cambodia and viewed himself as the catalyst for that development. The fascination in his reign arises from the inherent contradiction between the concepts of Buddha and king. Jayavarman, if his inscriptions are reliable, employed the Hinduized framework of kingship and its accompanying material opulence in a modest endeavor to mitigate his own and his subjects' suffering. As a monarch, he constructed roads around his realm, likely to expedite military responses to insurrections or invasions, while also enhancing access to resource-rich regions for export to China through the Cham seaports that were now subordinate to Angkor. The nationalization of monarchy by a ruler, probably the most ethereal of Cambodia's monarchs, has rendered Jayavarman's reign paradoxical. Statements regarding the man quickly conform to the structure of on one hand and on the other. Many bas-reliefs on the Bayon, illustrating fights against the Chams, feature graphic depictions of brutality. Likewise, several inscriptions of Jayavarman extol his vindictiveness and adeptness in political maneuvering against the Chams. His surviving portrait statues portray him as an ascetic engaged in profound concentration. His hospital inscriptions reveal that he endured the ailments of his subjects more acutely than his own. The suffering that plagued men's bodies manifested as a spiritual anguish for him, rendering it more intense. Conversely, his roads, temples, houses of fire, reservoirs, and hospitals were constructed with remarkable urgency between his coronation in 1182–83 and the second decade of the 13th century. Some were finalized posthumously. The numerous constructions led to a decline in artistic quality, and by the conclusion of his reign, Angkor may have depleted its supply of sandstone and limestone. As indicated by inscriptions, numerous ordinary individuals toiled to construct and sustain these edifices, which were ideologically designed to alleviate their suffering. From a 21st century perspective, this appears ironic. Nonetheless, it is essential to recognize that pain in Buddhist philosophy should not be interpreted just in a physical context. It must also be associated with life's objectives and the ways in which specific forms of suffering might contribute to the teachings of the Buddha. What prompted the expedited execution of Jayavarman's construction initiative? He was possibly around 60 when he ascended to the throne. The constructions may have represented a race against time. The program may have been a component of personal salvation, albeit his inscriptions do not elucidate the transgressions for which he sought atonement. The information regarding the initial years of his rule is derived from inscriptions composed at a subsequent period. These years were likely devoted to repelling another Cham incursion, suppressing a rebellion in the northwest, and fortifying Yasodharapura as a walled city for the first time. Significant demographic changes, as is customary, ensued from these military operations, as indicated by the Preah Khan inscription of 1191. To the multitude of his warriors, he bestowed the capitals of enemy monarchs, along with their resplendent palaces. To the fauna inhabiting his forests, he allocated the territories of the adversary. To captives of war, he granted his own woodlands, thereby exemplifying magnanimity and equity. It would be erroneous to sharply differentiate between Jayavarman's politics and religion, temporal and spiritual authority, and his self-perception and kingdom, as with past Cambodian monarchs. Before labeling him a megalomaniac, it's important to remember that without the support of others who shared his vision and recognized his value, he would not have ascended to the throne, particularly from such a precarious position. Nor would he have been able to maintain his authority. Numerous high-ranking officials, Brahmins, evangelical Buddhists, and military leaders likely perceived advantages in the kingdom's expansion, partially by leveraging religious institutions financed by the king, and partly by subjugating those who were either antagonistic or indifferent towards the kingdom previously. By the early 13th century, Angkor was exacting tribute from a significant portion of present-day Thailand, southern Laos, and Champa, which occupied the coastal regions of central Vietnam. The numerous half-smiling faces of Jayavarman's Temple Mountain and his portrait statues welcomed these corners of the known globe with their benevolently forceful gaze. Simultaneously, as Michael Vickery and others posited, significant animosity likely developed against Jayavarman VII during his reign among discontented elite members and previously privileged Hindu practitioners who opposed the king's conversion. The aspects of Khmer society instigated by a subsequent monarch, though which one remains uncertain, likely contributed to the anti-Buddhist iconoclasm that impacted numerous important temples of Jayavarman following his demise. The art historian Philippe Stern, who extensively examined Jayavarman's reign, identified 3 phases in the evolution of his iconography and building. These align with the 3 construction phases identified by Stern for previous Cambodian monarchs: public works, temples dedicated to parents, and the king's personal Temple Mountain. The public works of previous monarchs typically manifested as reservoirs, barae. Additional projects, including roads and bridges, were constructed but rarely documented in inscriptions. However, Jayavarman's initiative diverged from historical precedents. His hospitals, perhaps founded early in his reign, represented a significant innovation, as detailed in the style of Ta Prohm. 4 of them were situated near the entrances to Angkor Thom. They constructed more structures west of Angkor, extending into present-day northeastern Thailand and as far north as central Laos. We have found approximately 20 hospital locations to date. The Ta Prohm inscription indicates that the hospitals could use the resources of 838 villages, with adult populations approximating 80,000 individuals. The requested services involve supplying labor and rice for the personnel associated with each facility, totaling around 100 individuals, including dependents. The hospital steles provide information regarding the management of the hospitals and the resources and personnel assigned to them. A subsequent series of public works by Jayavarman VII included houses of fire at around 16 kilometers, 10 miles, along Cambodia's principal roadways. There were 57 between Angkor and the Cham capital, and 17 between Angkor and a Buddhist temple site at Pi Mai in northeastern Thailand. The specific purpose of these structures remains unidentified. Ultimately, during his tenure as Jayatataka, Jayavarman constructed his reservoir to the northeast of Yasodharapura, presently referred to as the Northern Barai. These advances sprang from Jayavarman's perceived mission to save his subjects, as indicated by the hospital inscription. Moved by profound compassion for the world's welfare, the king vowed, "May I rescue all beings submerged in the ocean of existence through this altruistic endeavor. May the virtuous Cambodian monarchs who succeed me attain salvation, free from affliction, accompanied by their spouses, dignitaries, and companions." The temples of Jayavarman VII. During the second phase of Jayavarman's reign, he constructed temples to commemorate his parents. The initial temple, Ta Prohm, ancestor Brahma, was consecrated in 1186. It commemorated Jayavarman's mother in the form of Prajna Paramita, the goddess of wisdom, symbolically regarded as the mother of all Buddhas. The temple contained a portrait statue of Jayavarman's Buddhist guru, with the term Kru, meaning teacher in contemporary Khmer, encircled by almost 600 statues of subordinate deities and bodhisattvas. The syncretism of Cambodian religion is evidenced by the allocation of cells on temple grounds to Shaivite and Vaisnavite ascetics, alongside Buddhist monks and scholars. The current state of Ta Prohm provides a misleading impression of its original form, as it has not undergone restoration like other significant temples at Angkor. Rather, it has been abandoned due to the encroachment of the forest. Jayavarman VII, referred to as Preah Khan, Sacred Sword, erected the subsequent temple complex. Constructed on the location of a significant Cambodian triumph over the Chams, its 12th century designation, Jayasri, victory and throne, may reflect this occurrence. No other inscription references this battle near Yasodharapura, implying a subsequent Cham incursion into the city. Grosslier has affirmed its existence and proposed that the bas-reliefs at the Bayon illustrate it. Preah Khan was consecrated in 1291 and has a portrait statue of Jayavarman's father, Dharanindravarman, exhibiting the characteristics of Lokesvara, the god symbolizing the merciful qualities of the Buddha. The symbolism is exceedingly fitting, as in Mahayana Buddhist philosophy, the union of wisdom, prajna, and compassion, karuna, engendered enlightenment, which refers to the Buddha himself, the enlightened one. During this phase of Jayavarman's artistic evolution, Lokesvara increasingly emerged, and throughout his reign, the trinity of Prajnaparamita, knowledge, the Buddha, enlightenment, and Lokesvara, compassion, remained fundamental to the king's religious ideology. The two temples were constructed to the southeast and northeast of the new center of Yasodharapura, thereafter occupied by the Bayon, allowing for a collective interpretation of all three temples. The Buddha statue at the center of the Bayon symbolizes the interplay of compassion and wisdom in achieving enlightenment. The inscriptions from these two parent temples illustrate the advanced state of the Cambodian bureaucracy, especially regarding its regulation of population placement and responsibilities, as well as the considerable number of individuals in authoritative roles permitted to deposit and endow images of deities within the temple. Ta Prohm accommodated several thousand individuals, as its inscription confirms. The population comprises 400 men, 18 high priests, 2,740 more priests, 2,232 assistants, and 615 female dancers, culminating in 12,640 individuals, including those permitted to remain. Furthermore, 66,625 individuals, comprising Burmese and Chams, render services to the deities, resulting in a cumulative total of 79,265 individuals. Likewise, the individuals reliant on Preah Khan, those required to supply rice and other services, numbered about 100,000, sourced from over 5,300 communities. The inscription lists the individuals, both men and women, who relied on prior temple endowments. They originated from 13,500 communities and exceeded 300,000 in number. The infrastructure required to supply food and clothing for the temples, merely 2 examples of provisions, must have been efficient and complex. 3 compelling observations arise from the inscriptions. Outsiders, such as Burmese, Chams, etc., were categorized differently from local individuals, possibly due to their status as prisoners of war, lacking lasting connections to specific noblemen, priests, or religious institutions. The average population of the villages indicated in the inscriptions seems to have been approximately 200 individuals, including dependents, consistent with the median size of rice-growing villages in Cambodia throughout the 1960s. The inscriptions reveal that the temples, while dedicated to the Buddha and functioning as abodes for numerous Buddhist monks, also contained sculptures and revered figures linked to several Hindu sects. Jayavarman VII endorsed this arrangement, as he maintained Hindu intellectuals and officials at his court. It is perhaps more beneficial to discuss the cohabitation of Hinduism and Buddhism in the temples of Jayavarman VII, and possibly in his thoughts rather than to suggest a systematic process of syncretism. The gem-like temple referred to as Neek Pone, twining serpents, previously constituted an island in the Jayatataka and was likely finished by 1191, as indicated in the inscription of Preah Khan. The king has positioned the Jayatataka as a fortunate mirror adorned with gemstones, gold, and garlands. At the center lies an island, deriving its allure from distinct basins, purging the impurities of transgression from all who encounter it, functioning as a vessel for traversing the ocean of existence. The island, surrounded by a wall designed with a lotus motif, symbolized a legendary lake in the Himalayas that is revered in Buddhist philosophy. Adjacent to the temple, like the lake, 4 gargoyles discharge water from the bigger lake into the smaller ones. The temple, erected above the water by a series of steps, was dedicated, like Preah Khan, to Lokesvara, whose image appears frequently in high relief on its walls. The 4 sides of the temple included clusters of statues. Regrettably, only one of these, depicting the horse Balaha, an incarnation of Lokesvara, can be definitively recognized. The other 2 are likely representations of Siva and Vishnu. Jean Boisselier contended that including these deities within the enclosure serves as a political assertion, indicating that the erstwhile gods of Angkor were now yielding to the Buddha. However, what is the rationale behind their actions? Boisselier, building on Muss's work, posits that Shaivism and Vaishnavism were perceived as having failed the Cambodians when the Chams successfully captured and occupied Angkor in 1277. Lake Anavatapta was revered not just by all Buddhists, but especially by Buddhist monarchs, or Chakravartins, beginning with the Emperor Asoka, who, according to mythology, could magically extract water from the lake to augment his purity and authority. During the second phase of his reign, Jayavarman VII likely commissioned enhancements to numerous pre-existing edifices, particularly the temples of Pai Mai in northeastern Thailand and Preah Khan in Kompong Svai. The substantial dimensions of these foundations indicate a trend towards urbanization under the reign of Jayavarman VII, or at the very least, a propensity to gather and mobilize significant populations from surrounding regions for state service. Jayavarman VII, like his predecessor Suryavarman II, was drawn to the enhancement of centralization and the associated concept of bureaucratic state governance. These concepts may have constituted his believed purpose to convert his subjects to Buddhism, or were associated with mobilizing people to respond promptly to external threats. The second phase exhibited numerous stylistic innovations. The pattern of multi-faced towers commenced at the tiny temple of Prasat Preah Stung and culminated at the gates leading into the capital of Angkor Thom. The hundreds of faces adorning the Bayon, the stone walls encircling the city for the first time in Angkorian history, and the minuscule causeways beyond the city gates are also seen. These constructs can be interpreted through the lenses of both politics and religion. Boisselier, in alignment with Moose, has likened the fortifications of Angkor Thom to a reinforced Maginot Line, ostensibly providing an invulnerable defense against any Cham incursion. The walls may symbolize the encircling mountains of Mount Meru or Jayavarman's temple mountain, the Bayon. Following the conquest of the Cham capital in 1191, Jayavarman likely resided in Yasodharapura for the remainder of his reign. At this juncture, his edifices began to exhibit indications of rushed construction, substandard craftsmanship, and fluctuating philosophy. He significantly modified the temple that would later be known as the Bayon, at various intervals during the 1190s, and perhaps in the 13th century. An inscription from the conclusion of Jayavarman's reign characterizes the city as his bride, the town of Yasodharapura, adorned with powder and jewels, ablaze with desire, the offspring of a noble lineage. The monarch officiated the marriage during an entirely lavish festival under the extensive canopy of his guardianship. The inscription further states that the purpose of the union was the propagation of happiness throughout the universe. At the city's core was the Bayon, a colloquial designation for Angkorian monuments in the 19th century, when the French assigned names featuring its numerous colossal faces, carved in groups of 4, alongside its enchanting bas-reliefs illustrating quotidian life, conflicts with Champa, and the conduct of Indian deities. The temple once included thousands of images. The primary picture, unearthed in the 1930s, was a statue of the Buddha, protected by a large hooded serpent, or Naga. Following the death of Jayavarman VII, iconoclasts physically displaced the statue from its revered location and discarded it into an air shaft. Significant debate has arisen regarding the symbolism of the temple and the interpretation of the causeways leading to it. Featuring giants, Asura, and angels, Devata, seemingly engaged in a tug-of-war, contending for the corpses of 2 colossal serpents. Certain individuals have contended that the causeways symbolized the renowned Indian story of the churning of the ocean of milk. Mus perceived them as rainbows guiding individuals to the deities, and others concur. At another level, the Asuras symbolized the Chams, while the Devatas represented the Cambodians. In this regard, it is alluring to view the city and most of Jayavarman's creations in dialectical terms. For instance, as seen, the duo of Lokesvara, compassion father, and Prajna Paramita, intelligence mother, begets the Buddha, enlightenment, regarded as the offspring of knowledge and compassion, namely, Jayavarman VII himself. We have observed this mindset in the cult of Harihara and the contrasting and integrative aspects of Cambodian popular thought regarding deities linked to water, moon, darkness, and earth, sun, brightness. The conflict between the Cambodians and the Chams, depicted through the causeways and bas-reliefs at the Bayon and Banteay Chmar, symbolizes the emergence of the newly converted nation of Cambodia, where Buddhism has triumphed over the Hindu deities of Champa. This dialectic may represent the message of the Bayon, which Boisselier referred to as the assembly hall of the city of the gods, due to the numerous pictures it contains. The half-smiling faces prevalent in the temple communicate a message regarding civil governance. In Angkorian art, it is both limiting and wrong to interpret these evocative faces as embodying solely one type of divinity engaged in a singular function. They function as protectors of the Buddha and his doctrines while simultaneously surveying the 4 cardinal directions, overseeing the realm, and potentially symbolizing the civic and military authorities of the era. Boisselier contends that they are royal embodiments of Brahma, and has also observed that their tiaras resemble those donned by the Cham Asuras along the entrance causeways. None of the identifications thus far has been entirely compelling. Another fascinating aspect of the Bayon, located at Ban Tiai Khmer, is that its bas-reliefs illustrate actual historical events in Cambodia, rather than narratives from the Ramayana or other contemporaneous literature. The 29 battles on the Bayon and at Ban Tiai Khmer feature identifiable 12th century weaponry. At the same time, other panels portray everyday activities such as commerce, dining, gambling, child-rearing, fruit-picking, healing the ill, and travelling on foot or via ox carts. Almost all the practices, items and attire illustrated in the bas-reliefs remained present in the Cambodian countryside after the conclusion of the colonial period. Despite the absence of these individuals' voices in Jayavarman's inscriptions, they traverse his bas-reliefs with unprecedented liberty, finally recognized as citizens of their land, embellishing a king's temple in a manner before unseen. Without additional inscriptions from Jayavarman's reign, he will remain enigmatic due to several ambiguities surrounding his character, rule, and philosophies. The enigma partially arises from the extensive social and intellectual transformations that defined 13th and 14th century Cambodia, potentially influenced by actions initiated by Jayavarman or his associates. Determining reality is challenging, as Jayavarman VII's temples feature inscriptions reflecting profound compassion and resolute determination. A detachment from worldly matters, illustrated by the horse Balaha at Nik Puen, and a meticulous strategy to transform the physical landscape of Angkor, which he perceived as having been devastated by the Cham invasion. A third enigma is the absence of edifices and inscriptions that ensued during Jayavarman's rule, seemingly commencing during his later years. It is uncertain whether Jayavarman bears any responsibility for this peculiar quiet, given he is infrequently referenced in later entries. The patterns of continuity, frequently emphasized in prior inscriptions, have been disrupted or significantly impaired during his reign. The most significant transformation impacting Cambodia in the 13th century was the widespread conversion of its populace to the Theravada form of Buddhism, as elaborated below. The extent of Jayavarman VII's involvement in this conversion, or his reaction to it, remains indeterminate. From a personal viewpoint, the history of his reign is the narrative of the imposition of one man's will onto a populace, a terrain, and a region of Asia, purportedly in the pursuit of an ideal Mahayana Buddhism. The purportedly liberating nature of his rule coincides with the ideology of democratic Kampuchea, also enforced from a superior position. It is highly improbable that Jayavarman VII perceived the Cambodian elite as his class adversaries, as Pol Pot did, or that he favored the forest people over the inhabitants of Yasodharapura. Nonetheless, his deliberate severance from the past, conflicts with neighboring entities, the magnificence of his construction initiatives, and what seems to be his enforcement of a novel faith, all exhibit parallels with the 1970s. Notably, the sole aspect of Angkorian life, commended by democratic Kampuchea, was the comprehensive mobilization of the populace achieved by Jayavarman VII, a feat accomplished by few other monarchs. Certain authors have linked Cambodia's adoption of Theravada Buddhism to the turmoil that ensued in Southeast Asia following the Mongol invasions of China. Others interpret it as indicative of the increasing influence of Mon and Thai-speaking populations, who were already adherents of Theravada Buddhism, on the inhabitants of Angkor. It is acknowledged that itinerant missionaries from the Mon-speaking regions of Siam, Burma and Ceylon, now Sri Lanka, significantly contributed to the process. Cambodian pilgrims traveled to Ceylon to study Theravada Buddhism and get clerical qualifications. While familiar with certain change agents, the reasons for the swift and extensive conversion remain ambiguous. In contrast to Brahmanism or Mahayana Buddhism, several experts contend that the Theravada variation was aimed at the general populace. A more plausible interpretation proposed by L.P. As exchanges between Khmer-speaking and Mon-speaking populations in central Thailand increased, the Mon, adherents of Theravada Buddhism, gradually converted Khmer speakers further east over around 50 years. It is indeterminate which facets of the cult were more attractive than others, or which societal sectors were drawn to it most rapidly. The conversion was incomplete, as the Chinese ambassador Zhou Daguan, who visited Angkor in 1296–97, observed that Brahmanism, Shaivism, and Theravada Buddhism continued to be recognized as legitimate religions. The 13th century, characterized by a scarcity of inscriptions for event dating, likely experienced significant religious transformations at Angkor, potentially driven by political factors and consequences. The conclusion of Jayavarman VII's reign and the subsequent reign of Indravarman II, 1200–70, remains ambiguous. Nonetheless, it is known that Indravarman, like Jayavarman VII, was a Buddhist who may be expanded upon the endeavors of his predecessors. The inscriptions discovered in the Bayon provide minimal information regarding the final part of Jayavarman's life. The inscriptions at the four corners of his city, seemingly created around his demise, offer valuable insights into Jayavarman's conflicts with the Chams and the Vietnamese. Coedes asserted that these inscriptions are composed in deplorable Sanskrit. Numerous examples, like certain bas-reliefs at the Bayon, remain incomplete, seemingly abandoned by the artisans upon learning of the king's demise. Ashley Thompson has articulated a position on the art of the post-Angkorian age. The chaotic iconographic fusion of plant, animal, and human elements that heralded the divine at each sanctuary entrance has disappeared. Images of mythical beings and formidable deities no longer adorn the landscape, and the allure and grandeur of the divine nearly vanish. This scarcity of documented material coincides with a pivotal era in Cambodian and Southeast Asian history. The 13th century was characterized by widespread crises across the region, marked by rapid transformation, substantial population migrations, foreign invasions, modified trade dynamics, the emergence of new religions, and alterations in the power equilibrium. A significant development on the mainland was the proliferation of Theravada Buddhism, which supplanted state-supported and caste-reinforcing Hindu cults. This move had numerous long-term repercussions. In Cambodia and Thailand, Brahmins retained their ceremonial functions at court, although their importance waned in other domains. Bas-reliefs, sculptures, architecture, and inscriptions elucidate the profound mythical and literary foundations of Indian art and literature. However, these routes became significantly narrower to satisfy the stringent requirements of Theravada aesthetics and Cambodian literature, exemplified by the local rendition of the Ramayana, which was infused with Buddhist principles. Regarding foreign relations, the two most significant changes impacting Cambodia are the erosion of its authority over populations in contemporary Thailand and the proliferation of Chinese commercial endeavors in Southeast Asia during the Mongol and early Ming periods. Despite the enduring Cambodian cultural impact in the Central Plain, where the Thai capital of Ayutthaya was established in the 14th century, Cambodian political dominance over the remainder of the region waned. Principalities that formerly paid tribute to Angkor, including Sukhothai and Luvo, now symbolically asserted their independence by presenting gifts to the Chinese court. Similarly, principalities in Laos and other regions to the south. The decline of Champa made Angkor susceptible to attacks from all directions, excluding the east. A Thai incursion transpired around the 13th century's conclusion, as Zhou Daguan documented. Zhou Daguan's account of his 1296–97 visit to Cambodia is the most comprehensive chronicle of daily life and the site of Angkor. Zhou's memoir, devoid of the Indian traditions that marginalize the average populace in literary discourse, is abundant in circumstantial information. His narrative depicts Cambodians engaging in bathing, commerce, and participating in processions, Regrettably, Joe allocated a significant portion of his brief text to the exotic depictions of barbarian existence. While he presented us with a documentary-like account of his time at Angkor, our interest is piqued by the comprehensive narrative he could have created had he been aware of, or concerned about, the enduring gaps in the historical record. The translated account has fewer than 40 pages, segmented into 40 portions. The subjects encompass a brief paragraph to multiple pages, including topics such as religion, justice, royalty, agriculture, birds, vegetables, bathing traditions, and enslaved individuals. Numerous characteristics of 13th century Cambodian life, as described by Joe, including implements, draft animals, and elements of rural trade, remain evident today, while others, such as enslavement, sumptuary regulations, and trial by ordeal, persisted in altered forms until at least the 19th century. 5 of Joe's sections address religion, enslaved individuals, festivals, agriculture, and the monarch's expeditions. Joe identified 3 religions with formal recognition at Angkor: Brahmanism, Theravada Buddhism, and Shaivism. Joe observed that the Brahmins frequently occupied elevated official posts, although he had little information regarding them. "I am uncertain about the origin of their doctrine. They lack an educational institution, complicating the identification of the texts they examine. The Theravada monks, informally referred to by the Thai word Chao Ku, closely resemble their contemporaries in Theravada Southeast Asia today. They shave their heads and don yellow robes. They leave their right shoulder exposed, don a robe of yellow fabric, and remain barefoot. They don yellow robes, exposing their right shoulder. They don a yellow skirt for the bottom portion of their torso. According to Joe, similar to the palaces and residences of high-ranking officials, Buddhist monasteries were permitted tile roofs, whilst the roofs of commoners' homes were required to be constructed of thatch. Joe admired the austere nature of the Theravada Buddhist Wats, observing that they lacked bells, symbols, flags, or platforms, and housed solely a gilded plaster picture of the Buddha. Joe elucidated the technique employed for inscribing palm leaf manuscripts, which continued to be utilized well into the 20th century, especially for religious and historical writings. The Shaivites, referred to by Joe as followers of the Tao, resided in monasteries that were less affluent than Buddhists. They do not present offerings to an icon, but rather to a stone block, akin to the altar stones of the terrestrial deities in China. Despite the decline of monastic Shaivism following the abandonment of Angkor, which ultimately led to its extinction, Indianized cults, including the veneration of Linga, persisted into contemporary times. Additionally, individuals identifying as Brahmins remained active at the Cambodian court, responsible for conducting royal rituals and maintaining astronomical records. Joe's account elucidates that numerous inhabitants of Angkor were, in a certain regard, enslaved individuals. As he notes, those who possess many slaves have over 100. Those with only a few have between 10 and 20. Only the exceedingly impoverished possess none. He further remarked that mountain tribes typically captured enslaved individuals, a practice that persisted into the colonial period. Cambodian society appears to have developed by progressively assimilating and integrating barbarians, who are prominently referenced in the inscriptions from the Angkorian period. Joe's report delineates certain limitations distinguishing enslaved individuals from others. They are permitted to sit and sleep solely beneath the house. Visiting workers must kneel, greet with their hands, and bow to the ground before entering the house. Enslaved individuals possessed no civil rights. The state failed to acknowledge their marriages. Compelled to address their masters as father and their mistresses as mother, they frequently endeavored to escape, only to encounter tattoos, mutilations, or shackles upon recapture. Joe provides detailed information regarding individuals in court and enslaved populations. However, he remains ambiguous. concerning the demographic share of society in the 1290s that was neither enslaved nor part of the aristocratic class. Individuals possessing a few enslaved individuals would be included in this category, as would the private landowners mentioned, and the Sino-Cambodians engaged in local and international commerce. Exclusive privileges were granted to the wealthy and religious groups, while specific prohibitions were imposed on enslaved individuals. Nonetheless, our knowledge of the intermediary population, likely the contributors to the kingdom's prosperity, was significantly limited. Nevertheless, when Zhou elaborates, his narrative frequently proves enlightening. His depiction of what he termed a New Year's festival, occurring in late November, exemplifies his storytelling prowess. The royal palace features an expansive stage. It has the capacity for 1,000 or more individuals. Globular lanterns and floral arrangements embellish its walls extensively. Confronting it on a bank over 200 or 300 feet distant are several wooden stall buildings constructed and secured similarly to the scaffolding employed in constructing a pagoda. They erect 3, 4, 5, or 6 structures and ignite pyrotechnics and firecrackers on them each night. The diverse provincial officials and prominent houses manage all expenses. Nightfall beckons the monarch to arise and witness. He ignites the fireworks and firecrackers, visible from a distance of 100 li, about a mile. The firecrackers are comparable in size to the pebbles launched by trebuchets and generate sufficient noise to reverberate throughout the city. This event, likely witnessed by Zhou himself, has been commemorated after the rainy season, when the waters of the Tonle Sap commence to recede, initiating the preliminary phases of the agricultural year. Following the relocation to Phnom Penh in the 14th century, the occasion was designated as the Water Festival, characterized by fireworks, floats, and royal patronage until the monarchy's collapse in 1970. The year 1993 witnessed the resurgence of both the festival and the monarchy. Zhou observed that achieving 3 or 4 rice harvests was feasible annually, a number highlighted by democratic Kampuchea in its attempts to transform production. This abundance certainly did not extend nationwide. As at Angkor, many harvests were feasible solely due to the concentration of labor, the fertile alluvial land, and the sophisticated water storage system developed over several centuries in the region. A contributing aspect was the uniquely beneficial behavior of the Tonle Sap. Zhou commented on the relationship between the agricultural cycle and this beneficial source of water. Over the last 6 months, the land has experienced a complete absence of rainfall. Precipitation occurs daily from the 4th to the 9th month, predominantly in the afternoon. The maximum water level around the freshwater sea, tonal sap, can attain approximately 70 to 80 feet, entirely inundating even towering trees, leaving only their tips exposed. Families residing near the Shire relocate to the opposite side of the hills. There is no precipitation from October to March. Only little vessels are capable of traversing the Tonle Sap. The miracle of the Tonle Sap astonished numerous later visitors to Angkor. Provided the region sustained a substantial population, the sediments deposited by retreating water enriched the soil with essential nutrients. Despite the abandonment of Angkor, the lake continued to be the most densely inhabited natural fishbowl globally, supplying generations of Cambodians with substantial dietary protein. We would appreciate the opportunity to ask Zhou Deguan about the agricultural practices of this period. How was the rice excess managed? Were cultivators predominantly free individuals, or a form of enslaved populace? Did agriculture significantly differ at Angkor compared to other regions of the kingdom? What was the extent of land owned by the royal family, and what portion was managed by Buddhist Wats? What did this control signify? In the absence of solutions to these inquiries, we should express gratitude to Zhou for his contributions. His depiction of rural marketing readily applies to contemporary rural marketplaces in Cambodia. The local traders are exclusively women. A market operates daily from approximately 6 o'clock till noon. There are no stalls. A series of tumbleweed mats are arranged on the ground, each in its designated location. Their officials additionally mandate the payment of a rental fee. By this period, numerous Chinese individuals had established themselves in Cambodia to participate in trade with China. Zhou asserts that the commodities exported by Cambodia in the 13th century were those that had been traded since the era of Funan, constituting the majority of Cambodian exports until the 20th century. These were high-value, low-bulk commodities, including rhinoceros horns, ivory, beeswax, lacquer, pepper, feathers, and cardamom. Imported commodities were paper and metal, porcelain, silk, and wickerwork. Zhou's report fails to specify the payment mechanism for the products. However, the use of government-sponsored currency appears improbable. Zhou was captivated by the monarch ruling at Angkor during his visit. Indravarman III, R 1296 to 1308, Zhou observed, in an inquisitive manner, that the monarch had ascended to the throne. The new king was the son-in-law of the former monarch, Jayavarman VIII. Upon the death of his father-in-law, the new king's wife clandestinely appropriated and presented the gold sword to him. Consequently, the succession transferred to the former king's son. The new monarch possessed a consecrated iron fragment implanted into his flesh, rendering him impervious to injury from any blade or projectile that might strike him. With this as his foundation, he emerged from his palace. Certain inscriptions from Indravarman's reign subtly reference these events, which transpired shortly before the entrance of the Chinese mission. One alludes to Jayavarman VIII's old age and a multitude of adversaries within the kingdom. Another inscription, reflecting a sentiment from Jayavarman VII, states that Indravarman sheltered the nation with his solitary umbrella. Conversely, no shade had been there prior beneath a multitude of such umbrellas. The changeover between the reigns of Jayavarman VIII and Indravarman III likely signified a significant shift in Cambodian history. Nonetheless, Zhou Daguan does not convey this information. In 1285, Jayavarman VIII constructed the final stone temple, the Mangalatha, in the Angkor area. Constructed by a senior official and dedicated to Siva, the single umbrella mentioned in its inscription likely alludes to Jayavarman's rigid Hinduism. Indravarman III meticulously supported both Theravada Buddhists and Brahmins, prompting speculation regarding a religious aspect in his non-violent coup d'etat. The king's procession in Zhou's account becomes more intriguing when juxtaposed with analogous processions documented during the colonial era. Upon comparing this procession to Sihanouk's coronation and other documented 20th century processions, it is evident that the ceremonial life in Cambodia and the hierarchical organization of events have remained largely consistent from the Angkor period to the present. According to Zhou, each time he appeared, a parade of flag-bearers, musicians, and drummers followed him. A contingent comprised 300 to 500 women from the palace. They donned garments adorned with a floral pattern and decorated their coiled hair with flowers, carrying large lit candles despite the daylight. Women in the palace were also transporting gold and silver kitchenware, along with intricately adorned instruments crafted in strange and unconventional styles, the purpose of which remains unknown to me. A separate group of palace ladies, equipped with lances and shields, functioned as the palace guard. All the king's ministers, officials, and family were positioned in the forefront, mounted on elephants. Their numerous red parasols were discernible in the distance. The king arrived late, mounted on an elephant with a golden sword, and the tusks of the elephant adorned in gold. He possessed over 20 white parasols adorned with gold filigree, each with a handle crafted from gold. Zhou thereafter depicted a royal audience typically held by Indravarman, and concluded his narrative with a condescending remark, stating, "This illustrates that despite being a nation of barbarians, they are acutely aware of their supreme ruler."